Good morning. I'd like to call the Wednesday meeting of the Kansas State Board of Education to order. I'd like to acknowledge all board members except for Ann Maw. She is absent, and Jean Clifford will be here on the phone for the first item, and then she will have to be absent after that. So all other members are present. Okay, now we have amended the agenda a little bit today. There's not anything being added or deleted, but we did have to rearrange schedules to accommodate some board members. So we are moving things around a little bit. First item will be item number 6, which is Dr. Watson presenting the information about ACT and ACT work keys. And then at 9:35 approximately will be the vaping update. And then after that, at about 10:25 will be the anti-bullying week information from Kent Reed. So those will be the adjustments in schedule. Any other changes for today's agenda? If not, I'd take a motion to approve the October 16th agenda as amended. Okay, by Michelle, second by Jim McNeese. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, looks like an 8-0. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna dial in for Jean, so let me do that, and then we'll get started with Dr. Watson and just as soon as we make connection here.
Hello.
Good morning, Jean. We've got you on, and Dr. Watson's getting ready to start.
Oh, good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And if you have questions, you might just, as I'm sitting right here by the phone, so just say something, and then we'll get you.
Okay.
And we've got a mic, so we've got, we can get you on to ask questions or make comment.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Watson.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Oh, this is booming this morning. Push this away a little bit. As you know, I came to you in August to talk about an opportunity that the federal government's kind of opened a window about taking a look at the ACT and the ACT work keys and ask for your permission to go solicit input from the field as what they wanted to do and have a discussion. So I'd like to share with you that data that we've collected over the last 2 months about this and talk about it as we go forward. So first of all, I just again want to define what is the issue. I think some people have said, why are you rushing this? You may have heard that, kind of outlined that today. The other thing I think is instructive, the chair and I were having a discussion. It's so appropriate, and dyslexia was a really good topic of this. When we have these hard issues that education people disagree to some extent, those are good discussions for us to have and good leadership for you to take. And so I always like to say sometimes we can all be misled a little bit by the loudest voice. And on this topic, there are loud voices on pros and cons, right? And they want to be really loud and they want to convince you of their side. Nothing wrong about that, but I hope today to kind of give you an overview of every voice that's at least come to us as we thought about that. So what's the issue? Our department is required to go to request for proposal, required now on the state assessment. We have not had to do that since we implemented the state assessment in the early 1980s. That is now a requirement. So Beth is writing that as we speak, and the deadline for her, she would say, is I need to get that done, Randy. So she's got to get this in for us to do a state assessment in the spring of 21. So we're not talking about anything this year. That's already in place. Spring of 21 and beyond, depending on how we write the RFP. So with that, one of the questions came up is, what about using the ACT or the ACT work keys? Well, the U.S. Department of Ed for years said you cannot use one of the college admission exams and state accountability. It doesn't match up to state standards. You just can't do it. They have softened that and I've got Brad and Beth here, they're much more knowledgeable about this, but they've softened that. And many states are now using ACT or SAT as their accountability assessment in high school. So that's the other window. We have two windows here lining up for consideration. The third is anecdotally, so this is always dangerous, but I've had people come up, and I know Beth and Brad have, why don't we just use the ACT? Why do we have to do this high school assessment? Almost all of our kids take the ACT. Wouldn't it just be easier to use the ACT? And that's anecdotal, you know, one here. But some districts have asked about that over the years. So, you know, in August we came to you and said, well, what's the question then? What will we ask the people in the field? This has been misunderstood, so I want to be clear. This is the question. Should the state board consider using the ACT and ACT work keys? Now, right off the bat, the federal government doesn't care about work keys. There's not enough validation for that assessment to work for ESSA. However, you also have accreditation. So we said, and I asked for you to allow me to go out in August, we would have both ACT and ACT work keys in a combination as the high school assessment. So we would drop the 10th grade English language arts and reading math, and we would drop the 11th grade science for ESSA accountability instead of the current high school assessment. That's really the question. This would replace English language arts, math, and science only at the high school. I think some people in our curriculum leaders said, is this going to go down? No, this is just the high school. So that's the limitation of the question. So we've asked several groups to weigh in, trying to get a cross-section of the state, of the people that do this work and represent people. The first is our Assessment Advisory Council, we just call the CAC, Kansas Assessment Advisory Council. Everything's an acronym. All right? And they surveyed their members. And we also asked the special ed directors across the state. We also asked the superintendents across the state, and we asked the curriculum directors, leaders across. Those are the groups that we surveyed. So to remind you what's going to happen this year with ACT and work keys, this will be the second year that Kansas juniors will take the ACT and or the work keys voluntarily at no cost to them as provided by the Kansas legislature. So every student in Kansas last year and again this year, with no action that you have to take, may take either one of these tests or both of these tests at no cost to them on a school day. Kansas this year will give at no charge the pre-ACT test to any freshman. I believe we're in that window right now, right, Beth? That wants to take it. So if I'm at DeSoto High School, I want to take the freshman, I can. If I'm at Turner High School and I don't want to take, I don't have to, but every freshman is afforded that opportunity. That's new for this year. That's also paid by the state of Kansas in the contract with ACT. Okay. So that's the current status. So let's see now, let's start to review the data. What does the field want to do or recommend to you that you should do? It's your decision in terms of the ACT being used for accountability with ESSA and with our KISA process. Here's the state assessment data relative to ACT. So I'm going to talk a lot about this now and next month when we review assessment because it's so misunderstood. This is 8th grade. I want you to think about a couple things. What is academic readiness to go to college or to an associate's degree or to a technical? What is the academic level? There's really one in the Midwest empirical definition of that, and that's how did you score on the ACT? Right or wrong, it's a cut score used to determine mathematics placement, English language arts placement, to a lesser extent science placement and reading placement, going to a 2 or 4 year institution. Teachers across the state using our standards, came together and set cut scores, trying to define that levels 3 and 4 would be that college and career level. All right? Now they had to, I won't say it was arbitrary, but they had to look at NAEP, and they had to look at ACT, and they looked at SAT, and they looked at advanced placement, they looked at the standards. They had to make some judgments, right, about where that was. We now have taken 8th graders and 10th graders, and we've done matched pairs. KU has done matched pairs. So these are actual students that have taken the 8th grade state assessment and later on taken the ACT and been matched. The ACT college readiness benchmark for English, as you can see there, is 18. That would fall for an 8th grader right about in the middle of the 2 range on the state assessment. In reading, the benchmark is 22. What does that mean? If I don't score 22, I have to go into remedial reading in college. That's what that means. That would be at the top level 2 as an 8th grader on the state assessment. And then mathematics breaks right at 2 and 3, which, man, that was perfect, right? They got that just spot on right, if you equate it to ACT at least. I bring this up because all the time we're talking about levels 1 and 2. I'll use reading as an example. If I'm in levels 1 and 2, I'm really not proficient, which means I'm illiterate. I mean, that's almost it's kind of a common way we think about it. That is not the case. To score level 3 and 4 means you're going to be in level 3 better than 70% of the students that will go to take the ACT in terms of readiness. And at level 4, you're going to be somewhere in math, you're going to be in the top 9% of the students' scores that will take the ACT. It looks like this. So in mathematics, your range is going to be in 8th grade. If you're scored level 4, 29 to 36, that's better than 91% of the kids that take the test nationally. Teachers of Kansas wanted a very high standard to reflect, are you doing work that will equate to post-secondary? Academic work, just solely academic work, right? Not all the behavior. We have to continue to educate the public that we have one of the strongest set of standards in the nation and one of the highest level of cut scores in the nation. But we did it, and again, we, the education community, did it because they wanted to ensure that when a student took that, we could say, if you're scoring in levels 3 and 4, and in fact, in some areas, it's showing up in the upper 2s, you're doing academically at that grade level work that would be equivalent to college level work later on. 10th grade looks very similar. There you see this is 10th grade. Reading up above, then there's English language arts, and then math. Actually, you can see you can almost score maybe a little bit less than the top half in English and still be at that 18 cut score. And if you wanted to look at the 10th grade, there you see it again, that anywhere from 28 to 29 in level 4. But again, level 3 is somewhere between 22 to 27, 29. It's a fairly good score. It all, though, relates to that's level of college and career readiness. I'm going to stop there and see if you have any questions, because understanding the level that the standards have been written, all right, Kansas standards, remember, we don't have Common Core anymore, they're Kansas standards, and the level that the teachers set the cut scores on do reflect being academically ready for post-secondary work. In the old assessment, when 90% of the kids were proficient, it was not this high. You can adjust this anywhere you want to make the scores look wherever you want. Some people have said this is too rigorous. Our teacher said it has to reflect what it's going to take to go do academic work, though, after high school. Otherwise, what are we telling parents and students? So, any questions about this part before we go on?
Jim McNeese has a question.
Well, not a question, a comment, actually. Thanks for affirming the cut score committee. There was a large group that met in here, and their goal was, in fact, to do what you've just delineated here today, that the scores that on our state assessment would have relevance to, I made a mistake when Simon said equatable, and the statistics people had a problem, but that we could use as a match, we could use as a story, because ACT is the current currency if you're going to go to college. And if our state assessments were going to have relevance and meaning where kids would take it seriously, we had to show that there was a connection to and a relationship between the score and the effort that they do on this as they would do on the ACT. You know, and so to that committee, who are nameless and not here, they did a great job. And one of the things I would remind the board too is even our critics have been complimentary about our state assessment and our standards, you know, in terms of that. So, job well done. You know,
Really is.
Yeah, because when we did it on those days, when we worked on it, we didn't know if that was really going to happen. That was our goal, and it's nice to see that the goal's there. So thank you to the folks who were on that, the teachers and the administrators and board members and KSDE staff. They did a great job.
Thank you.
So thank you.
And Beth, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, and Beth said, we're going to have to examine those cut scores because we're a little too high in English language arts and reading. If ACT is the benchmark, right, the common currency, at least if that's the standard we're looking at. But I wanted you to really have this discussion.
Steve Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randy, could you educate this former country boy on what work keys is? I just want to read this and see if you want to add to it. I just punched up ACT work keys, which I don't have that much familiarity with. I'm familiar with ACT, not so much the work keys. It says the ACT work keys job profiling method links job tasks with ACT work keys assessments to pinpoint benchmarks for hiring, recruiting, advancement, and training. ACT job profiling takes a focus group approach using input from employees to ensure customized job analysis. So what does that mean? And what does that mean for us?
Okay, so in general, and I'll get to the specific. In general, ACT work keys measures academic readiness for work readiness. All right, just like this is supposed to measure your ability to go on to a community college or a 4-year and do well academically. It's predicting how well the skill-wise, again, not whether I show up, but the skill-wise, whether I can do X jobs. The profile comes in if I go into any company, let's say Goodyear, I can actually profile every job that Goodyear has and come up with a specific score relative to work keys that I can then use to measure against employment, hiring, or decision-making process. We're going to have ACT work keys people here in January to talk about it because it's really an unknown across the state, Steve. I mean, it's really not, everyone kind of has a discussion about ACT. We don't have as much discussion about work keys. So next month when I give you a report on assessments, you'll hear me talk about those levels and how they equate to the ACT and our state assessments. Thank you.
We have another, actually, Jean has a question. Jean, are you still on, or do you want me to read the question? Okay, I'll go ahead and read the question. This is from Jean Clifford. She just sent me another one. Is there a difference between being academically ready for college work and academically ready for tech vocational school ready? Both are post-secondary.
Yes. The short answer is no, and it gets a little complicated, but when we show you where work keys fits into this, you're using, they use two different terms, but you will find that they're very synonymous in their scales, and our tech schools right now are requiring one of the two in terms of admission. So the same, if you're going to Washburn Tech, for example, you're going to have to show this score, take an AccuPlacer to get into a welding school at Washburn Tech. So it's the same criteria for, again, academic readiness. I always try to say that because it doesn't mean I'm going to show up. It doesn't mean I'm going to give effort. It doesn't mean I have a good study skills. It doesn't mean any of that. But academically, I have a skill set that appears to be equivalent to doing that level of work, both vocational, associate, and baccalaureate. For entry level courses. Researchers are beating me up all over the world right now, I think, because I'm trying to just make it as simple as I can.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll give you that background because we have established what that level should be with Kansas standards. You're going to hear this all the time. So if Janet's, with one of her, let's say at Leavenworth, some teacher may say, Janet, I don't know if our new math textbook meets the standards, right? And I can give you the answer to that on every subject, on every textbook. No. If you take something off the shelf and apply it, does it meet our standard? No. Because no textbook company writes for Kansas standards. We're too small of a market. And the minute we moved out of Common Core and moved things around and added some things, the 15% things, we altered that. So what a teacher would have to do, Janet, is say, you know what, that's in my textbook to be done at 3rd grade, but that's really a 4th grade standard in Kansas. Does that make sense? They're going to have to know the standards and they're going to have to pull resources to do it. There's not an off-the-shelf that I'm aware of that's going to be 100% match. I hear that all the time, that people say, that's not a match to our standards. There isn't an off-the-shelf resource that I'm aware of that's a complete match. Now you can, on computerized things, you can mix and match pretty quickly. But I just want you to know that because you'll hear that oftentimes. That is on purpose. The minute we didn't want to go with a Texas standard or a nationwide standard, but have Kansas, then our market is too small for national companies to want to write for that standard. They're writing for bigger audiences. All right. Let's look at results. This is the Kansas Assessment Advisory Committee, and I'm giving it to you as they gave it to me. So you're going to see a little bit different here, and I'm going to try to. They did percentages, not just numbers. These are percentages. Yes, we should do the ACT. Remember, it's not just the ACT. We should do the work keys and ACT. So I always 44% yes, 44% no. Pretty close to 50-50. And 13%, we just don't know. We're undecided. We don't have enough information, or we're just not ready to make a decision. This is the Assessment Advisory Council to the State Department and really to you. They look at all of our assessments, okay? Small group, but an important group. Small group and an important group. Let's take a look at special ed directors. Now we're going to go, and I apologize, I'm taking it just as it received it. I didn't want to put it in a common graph because then someone may say, well, you altered it. I'm just giving it to you. This, Bert Moore did this. We have 47 directors surveyed. 75%, if you round up, said, yes, we should do this. 25%, no, we should not do this. Now again, that's what they are giving you advice on. Let's go to curriculum leaders. These are just numbers. These aren't percents now, numbers. So we met with them, asked this question. This is called a Mentee, this is anonymous. We had an hour discussion, and then they said, 48 said, yes, we ought to do it. 29 said, no, you shouldn't do it. And 17 said, I don't know. Don't know. I either don't have an opinion or I'm confused and I don't know how to give advice on this topic, or I need more information before I can give advice. Okay? That's curriculum leaders. These are people, now, some of these may be superintendents in small schools. Some of these may be a principal that's been assigned the duty. In larger districts, this would be an associate superintendent or deputy superintendent level. Okay? So it varies. That this is that this was done here at the Ramada Inn early this month. Superintendents. Same question, council superintendents. 40 superintendents said yes, 28 said don't do it. 16 said, I'm not ready to make a decision at this time. So those are the groups we survey. The CAC, special ed directors, curriculum leaders, superintendents. Now you have heard from a variety of people on this issue, as I have. I'm just trying to give you the raw data as we go forward. Now, as you think about that, I want to also give you some changes that ACT had just announced this month. dramatic changes in the ACT, the way it's going to be looked at in the future. And I think it has dramatic impact on policy of equity. I want you to keep equity in your mind as you think about this. ACT for the first time, this is right off their website, by the way, 60-year history, says if you have already taken the exam and you take it again, you're going to be allowed to just take a subsection and not the entire exam. You could always do that on work keys, Steve, but you could never do it on ACT. You had to go set for the entire exam again, and then, as you know, a student would say, well, I went down in one of those other areas, but now if you say I don't like my math score, I can go set for just the math exam. That's a huge shift. I want you to keep equity in your mind. The other big shift is ACT is now going to super score the scores. So here's what super score means. If I take the exam more than one time, and my reading score is 31, 29, 33, 28, currently, do you know what score ACT uses? The last one, 28. Now they're going to take your best one. Many colleges have done that for scholarships for a number of years. They're not going to do that, and they say their research suggests that super scoring that makes more sense in a predictive model of how you're going to do than taking the latest one. So if a student does really well in their sophomore year and takes it more times. Now, here's the equity issue. The state of Kansas is paying for the exam one time. Many of our students that are that are scoring well and wanting to do well, and maybe going to selective colleges, as many of you know, take this exam more than once at their own cost. First generation and often poverty kids do not. Section retesting and super scoring will, if they don't take it more than once, won't affect them. I just see where that may start to get us into an equity issue, because if I take it 5 times and I can super score it, I may have a better option of scoring higher than the one-time test. And if that's disproportionate to who gets an access to that from a policy standpoint, just something to think about as we go in the future. This starts next year nationwide. It's just announced this month. It's a huge shift. Huge shift. So, I want to give you some recommendations, as I always do, and then it's up to you to do whatever you like with those. My recommendation is keep the current state assessment with no changes to it through 2021. That's next year. If you add up the undecided and the no, you're almost at a 50-50 every time with every group. I just don't think it's overwhelming enough to make a move. We have a window if we wanted. I just don't think it's overwhelming enough, I'm giving you my opinion, to make a policy shift until the field overwhelmingly goes one way or the other. I just think it's kind of in between. And so I think keep it the same in the proposal for 2021. Continue to study the impact of having free access to both exams, the ACT, the work key, and the new pre-ACT. ACT tells us most states, we're at about 70% participation, is that right? 78% participation voluntarily. They said you're going to go toward 90%. If that happens in 2 or 3 years, does that change the discussion? I don't know, right? But I think we ought to study that, get information back to you from the field in 21, and see if this is still the same, if it's shifted in any way, and would that impact it. The window here is tight because we have to do an RFP. It's the only reason. We don't have to rush a policy change. We just have to do an RFP and know what to write in there. So that leads to my recommendations to you for right now. Those that have been loud to you wanting to do this will be disappointed in my recommendation. Those of you that have been loud, not wanting to do it, will claim some celebration. I don't think it's either, because I really do think the field is fairly split, half and half, if you look at the data empirically on this issue. I just don't think, if it had been 75%, I think my recommendation would have been different. It just wasn't across all sectors of what we surveyed. Madam Chair, with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. We have several questions or comments. We'll start with Jim McNeese.
Randy, thanks for taking this challenge on, because I think we're facing a couple of things. First of all, the 50-50 split that you identified, a lot of it has to do with just real knowledge of what ACT and state assessments are and their purpose and their reason for being there. As a representative of SEAC, we had a discussion on that. You came and talked to them. And for a lot of the SEAC members, and SEAC being the Special Education Advisory Council, they had no knowledge of ACT. It wasn't part of their world necessarily. I was surprised to see that the directors were in support of it. It kind of surprised me, you know. So one of the things it's really tough to make a decision and to reflect what the field wants, because there's a lot of them that want to do it or would support it that have sometimes not all the information they really need, and then the other side that's opposed to it really doesn't have all the information they need. ACT is as much myth as it is reality, you know. But two things that do stand out is that ACT has, as I said earlier in comments, it has a monetary value. It's been used, you know, whether we like it or not, or whether people understand it completely or not. They know what it is. And state assessments has a bad rap, you know, for over the years. It's why are we doing it? You know, so when you pit the two of them together and you ask people, you want to do ACT, you want to do state assessments, I think people who are involved will probably say, let's go with the ACT. People know what that is. It has some monetary value. It's valued overall in our society. So that's kind of a challenge. But as a practitioner, as a principal, where ACT was valued, scores in my schools that I was lucky enough to lead were always important. It was a benchmark. You can have even accreditation and all that, but what was your ACT? How did it come out? And it was used improperly by both those who wanted to say how good we were and those that wanted to say how bad we were. You know, but I knew one thing: I could manipulate the scores. Did it? You know, there's ACT prep examples that go out there of kids changing their scores. And I can see a whole industry coming up with that, especially with the super score and especially with the ability to take just those parts that you need to take again rather than the whole test. It can be manipulated. You know, I'm not going to fight the ACT people. They'll say, well, you know, if you drill and kill, you can do it. You know, we make this really important. I'm just saying one of the side effects, or I would anticipate one of the unintended consequences would be people looking at the ACT and thinking about ways that they could do that.
And I agree, and you know, in No Child Left Behind, we did that with state assessments too.
Yes. Oh, without a doubt.
And I think some people have expressed to you a fear that if we do just that, Jim, we're going to go right back to test prep kids to pop that score, especially on the super score.
I'm moving forward on comments is one of the things that I wish we had more time. That we could have a better conversation across the state on the issues relative to the decision we have to make about ACT or state assessments. Because as I said earlier, I wish we could convene that 35 or how many people, it's a huge group in here when we did the standard setting.
Yeah,
you know,
always big.
Beth, how many with 35, 40 people? You know, college people here, and some were less than convinced that we could, in fact, you know, as I said, equate, or we could find, we could have scores that we could relate back to the ACT on our state assessments. And I'm very proud of the fact of what that group did, you know, because we are doing a great job. But I just feel like there's a lot more of a conversation that needs to happen out there to change. But at the same time, we're under the gun.
Just for this year.
Yeah, just for this year.
We can write,
Yeah.
right, we can review.
But we're going to be coming back here in a month and being asked to make a decision. When would we make a decision on this?
If you like my recommendation, you don't have to take any action because it would be the status quo and we would review it in 21.
Okay.
If you want to take action to do the ACT, that would take an action by the board today.
Well, one of the concerns too is whether it's large or and just with the opportunity that the legislature has given us to test all, we would anticipate that state averages would go down.
And that is correct, and they will go down.
Yeah, and that's not a reflection, but a lot of kids will be taking the test that really are headed in a different direction based on their IPS and their own personal issues. So that'll be an unintended consequence, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of points to discuss. I don't know where I am on it right now, quite frankly. I'm in that undecided group. You know. So thank you very much for bringing it forward. It's a great conversation, and it's I think when we finally do make a decision, we need to get everybody behind whatever decision we make. Thank you.
Ben Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm kind of with Jim, Mr. McNeese on this. I've had both sides come at me for the previous 2 months since I sent it to the superintendents and lawmakers and stuff for my monthly update to them. And I'm glad that we're not taking action right now. I think it's something we just study long-term versus a quick, hey, what are the ramifications of this, especially when it comes to accommodations and special needs kids. And I was surprised at the special education director's numbers as well. And I don't think there's a perfect answer to this question. It's not a, hey, this one's definitely right and this one's definitely wrong. It's not one of these issues, which makes it harder for us to make a decision which one is the absolute right one or the best option. Because there's drawbacks to both and there's pluses to both. My biggest concern was actually the messaging of using the ACT, because we all know what the ACT means. Everybody knows what the ACT means, and we've been sending the message that we are educating all kids, and my biggest concern is that if we went to the ACT, are we then sending a mixed message of, but we really want you to go to college. We really want you to have that 4-year degree. And I know the tech schools require the ACT or the work keys, and I was more open to the work keys portion because I think that's accessible to all kids going forward versus just using the ACT. And I'm at fault with not understanding, because I said I think he was talking about both, and I got corrected out in the field about, oh no, we're not talking about work keys. But I thought, and so I'm like, I really want the work keys. I could settle for the work keys, but I had a whole litany of questions that I had to ask, but since you made the recommendation of no change, I'm not going to spend our time on the board, but those are my concerns when we look at this in the future as well.
And I heard that a lot too. So work keys cannot be used solely for, it can't be used for ESSA accountability. It can be used for KISA, and if you can combine the two, you could have a group that actually gave some kind of cut score between the two. Remember this though, leaving it the same, we would expect every 10th grader in English, language arts, and mathematics to be at levels 3 and 4. That's just like scoring 23 on the ACT in mathematics. That doesn't change. That's the way it is right now. So those that say, well, are we just preparing them for one test? I'm like, well, our cut scores right now equate to that. Even though we're not, we're trying to get an IPS. So the message here has been difficult. And I think that's where you see the undecided people.
Yeah, and I think there's just a disconnect between people. People think the state assessments are a state accountability measure. Mm-hmm. For ESSA, they see ACT as a college prep, not as accountability measure. So I think it's just the label on it, even though the focus is the same, it's the label and how people interpret that label.
Sure.
Jim Porter.
Thank you. When this first, I tend to be an early adopter, so when this first came up, I thought this makes sense to me. I was concerned about the speed because, but I'm a big believer in collaborative decision making, and I'm pleased with your recommendation because I was the people that have contacted me are overwhelmingly against it, doing this for some valid reasons that I never thought of. And so the only question, and I don't expect an answer, but just a thought going forward, have we asked everybody that needs to be asked to participate? Are there other groups that perhaps we should include when we start doing this? I like your recommendation, and it's because I wasn't ready to make a decision. And so I support that recommendation, but I would think that as we move forward, are there other voices that need to be at the table so that whenever you do make a final recommendation, there are other groups that should be considered. That's it.
Dina Horst?
Thank you. Well, it seems to me that the issue seems to center around what you want to get from the test, whether it's following your standards. And so are we meeting the standards or are we not? And with the ACT, it seems to me that they are we're aligning them. So obviously our students are meeting the standards also. So I guess I'm kind of have a mixed feeling, much like my peers do, and maybe a little confusion as the field seems to, on what are we using the test for? What is our goal? If our goal is to find out if we're meeting the standards, then we need to stay with our assessment. And that we can pull out and say, the majority of kids are not meeting this or being able to answer this question correctly. So that means we need to reteach that standard. If that is what we're using the test for, then we need to stay with what we have. If we're looking at success of kids in a general sense, it seems to me the ACT may be a better route.
Thank you, Dean. I think you articulated, what's the purpose of any exam. I will tell you, Brad can tell you, giving you just examples. Remember I told you earlier anecdotally, I know he was in a fairly high-performing school district with faculty, where they basically said, I'm paraphrasing, our kids don't care about the 10th grade state assessment. And I think he responded, said, well, you must not care about it. Because kids generally care about what we care about. But we hear that. Well, they just don't take it serious because they don't get a grade, and then we don't do anything with it. That's an adult behavior. So when you hear that, you think, well, then should we? That's kind of what opened that discussion. When you hear that enough, and we hear it a lot, then let's have a discussion about an assessment that you think does, and we did, and we gave you the results. And so it's a messaging. It's complicated in the sense of what is the purpose of the exam and what do we want out of it. So.
Michelle Dombrowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is for all students that are the ACT that are accredited by the state. As long as it's a school that's accredited by the state.
That is correct. We're talking about accredited public and private schools. This is that discussion. I want to make clear though, if we keep it the way it is, private accredited schools are eliminated from the free test because state money can't be spent directly to private schools. So we could do a state contract on state assessment. But so a student in a private accredited school right now does not get free access to the ACT or the pre-ACT. If we move to state assessments, they would because it'd be part of the state assessment. So that's another little complicator in this as we look at how the law is written in the state contract.
And I have a 10th grade son, and this is his second year of taking the PSAT. He's taking that 3-hour test this morning. Did really well on it last year, and I asked him about the state assessments, and he said, kids do take it seriously, at least at his school, they take it seriously, and he likes the test because he does really well on it, but he, you know, as far as taking the ACT, he would be, he said either or, but he does well on the state assessment, so he said, I like taking the state assessment, so just feedback from a 10th grader that's taken the PSAT.
That's important feedback.
Yes.
Steve Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I have a question for Brad about the bouquet. If I just say bouquet, that probably conjures up an image.
We love the bouquet.
Yes, we loved the bouquet for a time as well. Personally, I think one of the best votes we ever took was to not become smarter balanced. I know a couple of board members here were for it, some were against it. I think on this present board, 3 of us were against and 2 for. But it was a 5-5 vote. I don't know how many 5-5 votes we've had in the 7 years almost that I've been here. Not very many. That was the biggest 5-5 vote we ever took. So we came this close to being a smarter balanced state, and we said no. We had this bouquet, and we have these multiple measures. So to the nature of what it is, what is the nature of what we're trying to do here with ACT work keys, state assessments? Could you please speak to what it means to have multiple measures or multiple measures available, or what it means to rely on a test? It's that's our balance. That's what we're wrestling with here. And so I thought I would conjure up the image of the bouquet because you have intimate familiarity with it.
So for those that are thinking, what do flowers have to do with this? Several years ago when we were under the waiver and we were preparing, because ESSA hadn't been reauthorized they were a decade late. We had the concept that based on a student's individual plan of study, they could take the ACT, the SAT, the state assessment. There's a bouquet of multiple ASVAB, but it aligned to where the kid wanted to go, and we could use that for federal accountability. Because this is all about, not all about federal accountability, but the problem with the bouquet was the U.S. Department of Ed said for federal accountability, it's got to be one test. Because at that time, there was no equation from you score here on the ASVAB or here on the SAT. They had to be equatable. So that's why the bouquet didn't work. We're just looking at, for KISA, that's why we look at the star recognition that we're getting ready to roll out. For state accountability, we are looking at multiple measures. We're looking at, when we say academic, we're going to look at how a school's doing, state assessment, ACT. So we're going to have grad rates, post-secondary effective, socio-emotional. So we are doing the bouquet concept for state accreditation, but just one piece of that will then be used for federal accountability, and that one piece has to be everybody has to take the same thing. In the future, if we could get away, because we are now equating the state assessment to performance on the ACT, there could be a day under ESSA where you could take one or the other, but now we're back to giving 2 different platforms, and we're just saying, so you're double testing. You've got to run 2 different engines. So the conversation now is, which engine would you like to run just for federal accountability? But for KISA, we want multiple, because it tells a better picture of how school districts are doing, not only academically, but with the board outcomes of socio-emotional, post-secondary, IPS. So,
Thank you.
Janet Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, oops, sorry, I apologize. I was just thinking, so much of what I want to say, I guess has already been said, but I know I've had several emails telling me that on the negative side, not to do the ACT, that we will begin teaching to the ACT instead of teaching to the standards. You know, that's one of the arguments. But also, I've been thinking a lot about this. One of the biggest complaints I've received since I've been a board member has been, we do too much testing. Testing. We can't teach them because you want us to test them all the time. You know, we're constantly testing. And so my thought was, if we put this ACT, you know, that's removing a part of that footprint, you know, of testing, of one of the complaints I've had forever. And also, another thing that I wanted to say, and I guess I'd just like for you to respond on these things, Randy, is when we had the innovative schools, some of the districts wanted to do the ACT, you know, yeah. I mean, because they felt it would better serve their communities. And one of them happened to be one of my districts, KCK. And as you all know, it's a very low socioeconomic district. But it had some wonderful ramifications, because a bunch of the kids that took this test did better than they even imagined. And they found out, you know what, maybe I can go to college. You know, I mean, it was a door opener for so many of those kids that had no thought of even doing that. So I guess I just like some response to those comments. Thank you.
First on the that we're over tested, I'd say that we hear that a lot too. And I think the response, but again, you get into what's myth, what's, you know, truth. We don't require a lot of testing. There is a ton of testing that goes on in schools. It's done at the local level. Ames Web, Dibbles, MAP, Aspires, local assessment, that's all someone else's. We require once a year a summative assessment that we've even shrunk the footprint of. But that certainly, and we heard in this discussion, some people say, well, we can eliminate the 10th grade and there's some assessment elimination. To speak to the other side, and I think, you know, you can get labeled any way you want. The decision to go to ACT for every kid in McPherson, and I won't speak for Cindy, even though we had tons of conversations in those days, was the right decision for the community of McPherson. They wanted that. That was important for them. That may not be important in Coffeyville where I grew up, right? It was important as I was sat in the seat as superintendent for McPherson. They wanted that. And when we announced that in 2011, the seniors, when we said we're going to pay for that, gave standing ovation to the principal because they wanted it and the parents wanted it. That's different than every school and every, you know, across the state. So I think the bottom line of why I made the recommendation is I think there just needs to be more discussion. You know, if the field moves in one direction or the other, you'll know, we'll know, but it's in just how we're discussing it. This is just how the discussion's gone on the last 8 weeks. It's Brad can tell you, he was just recently with some superintendents ago, you know, we haven't thought about that. I'll come back to Jim's, you know, hadn't thought. I think I may have changed my mind today, one way or the other. So that's why I made the recommendation. I think, you know, Cindy, again, I'm not going to speak for her, made that decision. It was exactly for that. I want to make sure that minority, first-generation poverty kids can see the potential, and the way that we can do that is require this. We're going to have high expectations for it. That was a local decision that she made.
Randy, would you go back to the previous slide, please? Which was basically where the recommendation came from. And I want to thank you for your work that you did do on this. I know it was a rush time, but I think we need to remember, as several board members have brought up, you know, we did this because of a couple of reasons. One, we were hearing from a lot of folks. We need to, you know, 10th graders, they don't take the state assessment seriously. Some do, some don't, but we did hear a lot of concerns there. We heard a lot of concerns about the footprint, as Janet mentioned, of this assessment. You know, but I think with some of the changes that ACT's putting in place, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. So I think it's, personally, I like the idea of the ACT, using that for federal accountability. But I do think it's wise to really kind of take a look at it and study it and see what impact that's going to have. and then to have an opportunity for a little longer conversation and discussion with everybody, and see if in the future we want to make a change. I think that's probably prudent to do that. I kind of, I don't know that we'll probably won't take a vote, but I think probably from consensus on the board, that's pretty much what I hear the board, is they certainly concur, and really, if we're not gonna make any change, there's really no need for a vote. So, I think your two bullets up there make good sense, and I certainly concur with that, and as long as the board will, I see no reason for a vote on this particular issue. So, thank you for
Thank
your
you, Madam
work. I
Chair.
know you'll continue, and Beth, this may take a little bit off your plate right now, although you have to write a different kind of RFP. So,
She's writing the RFP regardless. There's a
Regardless,
lot on
yeah.
her plate.
now you just know what to write it for, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, we're going to move to our vaping update. So, and I think Mark, I thought maybe he was outside, so hopefully he's listening, and he can come in and we'll have our vaping update. And then I think what we'll do, since this took a little longer, is we'll have a quick break between the vaping conversation and the anti-bullying lead. Does that sounds okay to everybody? Okay, so, welcome. Yeah, we got lots of good folks here. Thank you for coming. We appreciate all your work that you continue to do, and we look forward to your update today.
Well, thank you. I brought quite a crew with me today. I think most of them will have an opportunity to present and share. Thank you, Madam Chair and board members, for this opportunity. I'm Mark Thompson. I inhabit the 6th floor of this building. What we're going to hopefully cover today is we're going to give an update on where we stand with the development of a draft policy and a bit of an explanation as to why we don't have one ready for you to consider for discussion and potential recommendation. We do have an update on Tobacco 21, and one of the handouts that you are receiving is a detail of that. We also are going to talk about cessation. A representative from the American Lung Association is going to talk about a couple of resources that they have, and we also have a pediatrician who's going to be talking about kind of the science behind cessation. Share a couple of resources, one of which you have, the Vaping 101 resource. We'll be talking about that. And then give you some updates on some additional school district that has joined others in the litigation against the vaping manufacturers, and some stats updates. So the first thing I want to talk about is the draft policy that we understand that the state board would like to consider recommending or adopting for schools. We had a subgroup that worked on this, and they came up with a recommendation where the use, possession, or promotion of any tobacco product or electronic nicotine delivery system by any person, and this would include staff, students, visitors, volunteers, is prohibited in any district facility, in school vehicles, at school-sponsored activities, programs, or events, and on school-owned operated property at all times. So it would be a 24/7 policy that would affect all individuals regardless of their role. Then the policy would outline exactly what a tobacco product meant, what defined a tobacco product, what defined an electronic nicotine delivery system, what promotion, what we mean by promotion, and then talk about recommendations for if students are found in violation of the policy, that there would be parent notification, participant in tobacco education program, and referral to cessation program. But there's still some things to hammer out, one of which is the issue of possession by visitors. And Angie, if you wouldn't mind, this is Angie Stahlbaumer from KASB, and I want her to be able to address KASB's views on this.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. We appreciate having a seat at the table. The task force is doing great work. The reason why KSB hasn't supported for our members policy covering visitors is because that becomes a very complicated issue. And part of what we're dealing with now is the draft policy is written, covers things like promotion of these materials. Promotion gets a little bit sticky because it covers even things that people are wearing. And so then we're getting into dress code, and then we're getting into First Amendment rights. And so we have a little bit more authority in dealing with those types of things for students. There's First Amendment case law that talks about, how we can get involved if it's a pro-drug message or something like that. Otherwise, we have to show it's a substantial disruption at school before we can limit students' freedom of speech. We do not have those same abilities to get involved with employees necessarily. With our licensed staff, we have to negotiate any changes in dress code. That's a mandatorily negotiable item. It's not impossible. We could get that done most likely, but that's something we'll have to see as a little bit of a hurdle. When we're dealing with people coming in from the outside, though, that gets a lot more complicated. So visitors, parents, those types of things, we have very limited authority to tell them what to do, what to wear, what they can possess on their person and in their vehicles. So even things like possession of these things on school property is going to be complicated because from an enforcement standpoint, we have no authority to search them. That then gets into Fourth Amendment protections against search and seizure, and we're seen as a state actor. So there's case law in there too that limits our ability to search students, staff, and certainly anybody on the fringe. We could look at it as if you see something, say something standpoint, and we could deal with it in that way most likely, but we would anticipate it's going to be hard to consistently enforce language that says that visitors have to do all of these things. As far as contractors are concerned, we can try to work with any contracts, covering this issue and moving forward, but those are some of the things that we're going to struggle with in a comprehensive ban on school property. Does anyone have questions for me?
Board members, I think what we'll do is one each different person, if you have a specific question, each different person, you can ask a question. I do have a question for Angie.
Sure.
I understand, you parents, you can't search this, that, and the other, but can you not restrict the use of the vaping product on school grounds or activities of an adult?
What?
You restrict cigarettes.
Sure. And what we have is we have statutory backing on some of that. We have statutory backing with the Kansas Clean Air Act to say that you can't smoke within 10 feet of a school building or, employment facility or windows and things like that. We have the authority through state constitution and state statute for our board members to essentially legislate within their districts, home rule authority to do that. The trouble with enforcement on that is going to be that really the only tool in our bag to deal with that is to tell people that they have to leave or that they're not able to come onto school district property. And that's one of those things that we've used very sparingly because we don't want to get into a position where we don't allow parents to have access to their students' teachers, parent-teacher conferences, IEP meetings. So That would be the problem. Could we say you're not allowed to do this? I believe that you could, but you're going to be limited in how you can get involved.
Yeah, well, and I would say, I mean, and speaking from a former building administrator, I would certainly not want anybody on my grounds vaping,
Sure.
including adults, and I would hope we could have a way that the schools could have authority to exclude vaping, and if people are vaping, to ask them to leave. And maybe if that's statutorily, maybe if we need a statute, then we can work with legislature on that. That's something, and I understand the other things, but it seems like to me it'd be a good thing to be able to ask folks to leave if they seem to think they have to vape. So, I don't know if you have any other response. We do have a couple other questions. Steve Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have tobacco-free campuses all across the state, right? We just say no tobacco. Can we do the same thing with alcohol? And I have a reason for asking this, but can campuses say no alcohol even for visitors?
We can, and we have federal law that covers some of those things as well. I mean, we have drug-free, alcohol-free school zones. So that is not uncommon for districts to say no alcohol use. What we generally do with regard to visitors, though, we have staff policies that cover this, we have student policies that cover this, but when it gets to visitors, we generally just say if you're going to use our facilities, you will abide by, our policies with regard to tobacco and e-cigarettes or alcohol and those types of things. As far as alcohol is concerned
Yes.
too, we still have public property, and there are statutes in the state of Kansas that talk about consumption of alcoholic beverages on public property. So there's a little bit of background there as well.
Well, if I could think out loud a little bit, I'm just wondering if, because we know the effects of alcohol, we don't know the effects of smoking. We can't tell if somebody smokes 3 cigarettes, we don't know what the effect is that going to have on somebody. But we know what alcohol does. So I was just thinking if we could encourage our local boards, our local districts to say, okay, treat vaping the way you treat alcohol, okay? Visitors over the age of 21, it's probably legal for them to have a flask of Jack Daniels in their glove compartment, right? But you can't bring it into the school, and you certainly can't consume it in the school. I'm just wondering if we can build a bridge by telling people how to effectively deal with all this e-cigarettes and vaping by simply saying, treat it as alcohol. I'm trying to think, might there be a way to do that?
Sure. There is, and the main thing is just the knowledge that we're not going to be able to consistently make sure that nobody has it in their vehicle or things like that. But can we get involved if somebody's inebriated or if we see them with a flask at a football game? We absolutely can do that.
All right, thank you, I appreciate that.
No problem.
Jim McNeese?
You're getting closer, because I was kind of confused because you were leaving cracks in the door that we can't do certain things. We can tell people they can't do anything. You're coming on my property, and state statute does it. We do it as a board, and local boards do it as well. Your comments were just, maybe I just misinterpreted them. That there was some, well, maybe we can and maybe, we can, and we do. You will not bring guns, you will not drink, you will not do drugs, okay, you will not smoke, you will not vape on our campuses. Okay, now, I'm not gonna go out there and start checking every car as they come in. We're not gonna do that, okay? But if I have, someone tells me that this is going on, I have the right as the principal or the security people, if I have probable cause, to search them.
We have,
I'm just saying, I'm talking like a principal now. You're coming on my campus. My job is to make sure this is a safe campus. And I don't want to leave any impression out there to people that principals or schools or we're, as a board, we've got the right to do things to protect our campus
we can't.
and students.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so absolutely. We can have a policy that says you are not to have these things, you're not to do those things. What's going to be problematic is we will not have any right to search a visitor. There's case law about that because that's
I search a visitor every time they come to a football game and go through a screener.
Well, and
That's a search.
if we have metal detectors for security reasons, you know,
That's a search.
that can be.
That's considered a search.
But we have no authority to search visitors generally. There's case law that talks about when we can search students. If we have reasonable suspicion that a student is violating policy at school, we can search them. So if we had reasonable suspicion a student had a vape on a pen or something like that on them, we could search them at that point with reasonable suspicion. But we have to keep in mind that we are state actors and the Fourth Amendment applies to us. So the danger in searching people when we have no statutory authority or case law authority is that school districts will get sued. And I guess that's what I'm trying to prepare you for, is that we are not necessarily believing we are on the winning end of those lawsuits, given the case law that is out there.
Jim Porter?
Jim talked as a principal, I'm gonna talk as a superintendent. We're getting hung up on whether or not you can search a visitor. That's immaterial. We need to say, you can't use these products on our campus. Yeah, we're control that. We've been doing it for alcohol, we've been doing it for tobacco. Let's not get hung up on these things. Let's just make sure that our laws, that we say that you can't use it, and then enforce that part of it. I'm not gonna go look in somebody's pocket. I'm not gonna search them unless I see them using it. But if they're using it, we need to be able to deal with that, and that's the important thing. So let's not get hung up on other things. Let's deal with the real issue and move on from that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. And I think our takeaway is that we're going to need to separate possession from visitors. We can address possession by school staff and students, but the possession piece of the draft language policy will need to wordsmith so that we know that it reflects use by visitors, use by all parties, but possession and promotion are going to be reflective of the individuals that we do have governance over.
Let's not let that issue keep us from moving forward.
Yes, I agree. Michelle?
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's not my call. Sorry, Kathy.
Not a classroom.
So when you were talking about promotion, like let's say I'm walking into the school and I'm just there to drop off something for my son and I have a Jewel t-shirt on. You can't, I can't come, is that what we're talking about as far as promotion? I can't, so you're gonna say, I show my ID at the thing and then they see this Jewel, I'm sorry, you can't come into the school right now. I'll come out and grab those shoes from you and drop them. Is that what we're talking about as far as promotion? I guess I just wanna make that clear.
Madam Chair, is this okay? So yes, I mean, that's what we're going to have to look at, and putting together the language is just being careful about how that is worded. As one of the drafts that was circulated has, promotion would include things that people wear, or handbags or things like that might have a Jewel emblem or something that's trademarked on it.
Okay. So at this point, I'd like to move on.
Okay, we do have one more question.
Okay.
Janet Wall.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to ask you about these policies that you're recommending. They're on, I'm assuming you're referring to these ones here, is that correct?
That's, we're going to be addressing that next.
Oh, okay, I thought that's what you were addressing. I guess, I can wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. The podium password.
Speak it out.
this point, I'm going to turn it over to Hina Shah from the Kansas Health Institute and Sarah Prem from the American Lung Association, who will be presenting on Tobacco 21.
Okay, sounds good. Good morning. Thank you for hearing from us today. So I was just going to set the stage for Sarah Prem, who's from Lung USA. We're part of a state policy subgroup looking at what other states are doing related to different policies with vaping. Tobacco 21 is one set policy. There's about 18 states, including and Washington, D.C., that have passed some Tobacco 21 law. And so since 2015, so Hawaii kicked it off. And then in the past year, so in 2019 alone, we've seen 13 states also pass Tobacco 21 legislation. So what you have in front of you is the model policy legislation that's been proposed by several organizations. And you'll hear from Sarah on what Kansas is going to propose to the legislature as well. And so I'll kick it off to her, but there are several restrictions, exemptions, other things that other states have done. And so you'll hear from Sarah on what Kansas is proposing. And if you want to hear about the other exemptions, I can step in and talk about those as well.
Thank you, Hina. So I'm Sarah Prem with the American Lung Association, but today I'm wearing the hat of Tobacco Free Kansas Coalition, where I'm the co-chair of the policy committee. So the policy committee has been working on our draft Tobacco 21 policy based on that model policy that you have in your hands. So it's a best practice policy. We have made it Kansas by taking into account the existing statutes and making the edits and revisions to that statute. I would share that with you, but we're not quite there yet. We've been working also closely with the policy group, so we're kind of like multiple groups here, but the policy team for the Vape Work Group Task Force. We just actually had a session yesterday, and there's a few little nits and gnats that we need to address. So I didn't want to share that just yet, but I think you'll get a very good idea of where we're at here. So, okay, or click not roll. So just to kind of set the stage, as you heard from Hina, there are 18 states that have Tobacco 21. The reason to do Tobacco 21, there's many of them and they're very compelling. We know that raising the age to 21 has substantial positive impacts on health and literally saves lives. We know that older adolescents and young adults have become the supplier in the school. If you have someone who's 18, they're very likely in high school and they can supply the younger folks. So by raising it to 21, you get rid of that. We also know most adult smokers began smoking before the age of 21. So, there's a very good chance that even if you start smoking after 21, you're not going to develop that lifetime habit. So that's a very crucial age range. And also the point of the states and the localities. And I would point out that Kansas, I think it's 27, it might be 28, but basically a third of our state's population is protected by Tobacco 21. So it's not a new idea. So basically, to have a comprehensive program for tobacco control, it needs these elements. And the cornerstone is Tobacco 21, but you need to look at increasing your tobacco tax, funding your tobacco control programs, having your strong smoke-free laws, and having barrier-free tobacco cessation coverage. I just need to point that out to make sure that it's clear. Tobacco 21 isn't the panacea, but it is a cornerstone of this process, and that's why we're advocating for it. So our draft policy, again, is based on the model policy, which was created by a consortium of public health organizations. And the goal is preventing early addiction, disease, and premature death as a result of use of tobacco products. So we want to eliminate existing, we want to make sure that there is no possession, use, or purchase restrictions, putting the onus of the policy on the retailer for selling to users under 21. So the onus is on the retailer. So the prohibition is on sales of tobacco products to those under 21. The reason for that is to not penalize children, basically. But if you have the responsibility of selling tobacco, you also have the responsibility of making sure you're selling it legal. Our policy makes sure that it covers all tobacco products, and it does not exempt any specific product. And the reason for that is we don't want to have the suggestion there should be a vape 21 law, that all other tobacco products remain at 18 and one product goes to 21. All tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, would be 21. It applies to all retail environments. Don't exempt any kinds of stores or restaurants, anything like that. So it's all retail environments. And we are very strong in that the language of the bill does not include anything about preemption. And I'll talk a little bit more about preemption, but we want to make sure that localities that pass 21, that if theirs is stronger than the state statute, they are welcome to do that. The state statute kind of sets the floor. So we don't want any kind of preemptive language in there.
Can I interrupt
Sure.
with a question? Because this says all tobacco products.
Correct.
And the vape are nicotine delivery products. There is, my understanding, there is no tobacco in it.
You've asked
I-
about a very key point, which is the definitions. So the statute, and we're working, the statute and the model policy, if you look at that, you'll see the definition, which is basically the definition we're using. It does specifically call out electronic nicotine devices, or electronic smoking devices. The effort was to create language that would encompass everything that exists
Right.
now and be broad enough for things that might get developed in market research.
Yeah, I just would hate for there to be seen a loophole.
Right, and that is why all the definitions need to address tobacco products, smoking, to make sure that we include electronic smoking devices are tobacco products. So that's in the definitions. I think there's also elements of those definitions in our smoke-free law, indoor clean air. So working to make sure that all those definitions are consistent and make sure that electronic smoking devices are tobacco products. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing that's very important in the policy is strong enforcement mechanism. We're looking at the penalties for noncompliance, and we have language about who enforces it and how that enforcement is funded. There's, in our policy, currently, I will touch on the retail tobacco license fee, which we have in the state, and that is a very good thing that we have that. Currently, a retail license is $25 for 2 years. That has not changed since 1972. We are looking and that in the statute, that amount of money funds enforcement. So part of our statute that we include an increase in that. So that goes to enforcement. Another element of funding enforcement, which is very important to any policy that you pass. Currently, if you lose your license that you have to display in your retail location, it's $1 to replace it. We're going to bump that up to $10, and we're benchmarking that with to replace your car title is $10. If you lose your car title, it's $10. So we're working on ways to responsibly and reasonably increase money for enforcement. Of course, when we introduce it, there'll be a specific date that it takes effect, and model policy does not include exemptions for military. So we've already heard from Dr. Norman, our Secretary of Health, that he is in favor of 21, but also that he is not in favor of the military exemption. The Attorneys General of the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy have all signed a letter to the editor in Stars and Stripes, along with the Surgeon General of the U.S., saying that tobacco is the greatest obstacle to military readiness. So we know that the military is already expressing its concern. So our policy would not include a military exemption. So, specific highlights: it covers all cigarettes and tobacco products, including electronic cigarettes. It has key provisions for enforcement, which I discussed, increasing the retail license fee and increasing some of the penalties. We want to remove all uncontrolled sales channels like self-service displays, vending machines, and free samples. It does not create a new category, so like I referred to the Vape 21, you don't want to have a law that just deals with one category. It does not penalize youth, and it does not preempt local jurisdiction. So those are the key points of the legislation. Any questions on that?
I have,
Sir,
and
I think I might have gone.
did we talk about advertisement? I mean, I see,
That is
advertisement.
not part of our state statute.
Well, there's promotion, you know, for seniors and for students that I see, you know, that students is the one that jumps out at me, you know, for vaping.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
In their promotions or in their advertising,
Mm-hmm.
okay, billboards and printed material have said that there are discounts in purchasing vaping items for students and for seniors. I'm not worried about the seniors,
Sure. All right, I gotcha.
unless they're in high school.
I do not believe our statute currently addresses advertising marketing. I am not entirely sure on that. It does not. Okay, it does not address
Should it?
that.
Should it?
I believe that would be more on the national. Yeah, that's a federal issue.
Okay, and the feds are addressing it, so I just wanted to see, I didn't see it here, so thank you.
So Public Health Law Center has, their position on this is it's really tough to put in restrictions on marketing. It has to be done at the federal level if it is. I will say that I think it was Delaware is the only state that's passed Tobacco 21 that has included some marketing provisions in their statutes, so we can look at that and show it to you.
So billboards that are on the highway that say, you know, vaping this, whatever, and then have senior and student discounts. We can't ban those in Kansas?
We could.
Here's one ban every now.
There you go. Let me see if the AG's office is here.
We'll bring in.
We're not hesitant to do other stuff.
This is Jordan Brewer from the Attorney General's
Well,
office.
thank you.
That's a great question. There are a lot of First Amendment issues that we would have to take a look at. It's possible. I don't know about the Delaware statute. I'd be curious to look at that to see if there's anything we can do. When we're talking about advertising that is very targeted towards students, we might have a little bit more leeway to do something there. Just in a general ban on advertising, it probably isn't going to happen unless the federal government does something. We're open to everything right now. There aren't, a lot of states are playing catch up at this point, to be completely honest. And nobody really has a great baseline for everybody to try to copy at this point.
So we should be in touch with our federal representatives in the state and the House to, they've got legislation pending, I believe.
Yes, and I don't know if it has anything to do with marketing or not. I know a lot
Well,
of
the cigarette thing it dealt with marketing. You can't have any advertisements at all.
Right.
Yeah, that's the master settlement agreement. Now that curbs a lot of the cigarette issues. It doesn't apply to other tobacco products or to e-cigarettes.
So that was part of the industry and the federal government negotiating. It's not part of statute.
That was actually individual states. The federal government was not part of the master settlement agreement. So
Okay.
it was individual states with large tobacco companies, and that curbed advertising,
The
particularly.
Marlboro Man disappeared.
There's extreme restrictions on advertising, pretty much bans of all flavoring except for menthol. It's the only flavoring in cigarettes that's still allowed. But it just touched on cigarettes and something called roll your own tobacco, which is part of our definition is a cigarette. Anything else is not included in that, but that is a state action. There are 4 states that actually didn't join the master settlement agreement: Texas, Minnesota, Mississippi, and Florida. Each of them have their own agreements with the large tobacco companies, but it doesn't apply to some of your smaller tobacco companies. So it's a little complex, and I don't want to go too much into that. To answer your question, yes, we can look at some targeted marketing restrictions, but I think it would best be done on a federal level to apply across the nation. If we start doing something and Missouri doesn't do it, you have billboards in Missouri that you can see from Kansas. What are we supposed to do about that? And it just, individual states trying to do something like this, it becomes very difficult.
Okay.
Janet Wall has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Has there been any discussion on banning flavored fruit and candy? I mean, those are directly targeted at our young people. I mean, I don't know many people over 50 or 30 that are interested in smoking candy. You know, I mean, maybe me. I don't know.
You're a senior.
I'm a senior. But seriously, I mean, I think that's the one that's directly targeted to our young people, because I've even had young people tell me, we would have never smoked a cigarette because we have been trained how dangerous they are. But vaping's a whole different animal. You know, so
Yeah.
I think that's my concern, and I'd like that in the policy.
Yeah, I mean, we would keep it separate from tobacco 21 though, if you did a flavor ban, and that's how it's been proposed kind of in other states. So there's about 7 other states, so Washington, Oregon, Utah, Montana, Michigan, New York, Rhode Island. They've all passed some sort of a flavor ban, whether it was the governor that did it or whether it's through statute or another mechanism. There is some contention right now though, and litigation with it. There's 4 that are considering a ban, so the Trump administration announced it, Chicago, Illinois, LA, and then there's a few that have a 4-month ban. So Massachusetts has a 4-month ban. So flavor bans are something new that are being considered and proposed. However, we would probably have a separate statute or legislation on flavor ban and proposing that from tobacco 21. So we will definitely give you a synopsis of different restrictions and bans for your next board meeting. There's flavor bans, there's zoning restrictions you could consider, there's tobacco 21, there's a few different policy options that are their point of sale and smoke-free. So the Clean Indoor Air Act, so smoke-free restrictions is another place to look at for policy as well.
Well, thank you so much, because that's one reason, the major reason we brought this up. I mean, it's horrible for everyone, but it's for our young people, you know? And these kids, you know, candy and fruit are really nice and fun. So I would appreciate it. I feel strongly about this. Thank you.
Jim Porter.
I was gonna ask for that synopsis, as you've already agreed to send it to us, so my question has already been answered.
So the policy, we've got the draft, and like I said, we're just kind of refining a few things. And part of that is we'll be making sure that the board receives the revised language when it's ready to go. We are recruiting our sponsors, and we plan to have a pre-introduction education campaign. Okay, so we're going to gather all the supporters together, get everybody on the same page with the legislation, have these conversations with others in the community who are supporting this. We definitely want to kind of construct that big tent and get everybody who's in favor of tobacco 21 together, make sure we're all confident in what we're proposing, to have it introduced when we hit the 2020 session. So I did want to address the preemption. I mentioned that earlier. So what we do have information on is that you probably have noticed that Juul has been lobbying. They have been going out saying we are all for tobacco 21 because we don't want these in the hands of children. But what we're seeing is some of the legislation that they're putting forward and supporting has these preemptions. So we saw that in the 4 states that did introduce 21, and they had some preemption language in there. So basically making it possible for the state law to prevent the local communities from having more strict versions or to prevent them from making their own legislation at all. I'm not speaking from any knowledge point on that, but I wonder if the flavor bans might be part of that, if you have preemptive language that would prevent localities from doing their own flavor bans. Because as we just heard, a lot of the flavor bans are happening more at the local level. And we do know that Kansas is on the list. We are targeted for efforts from their lobbyists to work to get preemptive language into our bill. So we want to make sure that we are standing firm and keeping preemption language out of the bill.
Jim Porter.
Thank you. As I think most of you know, we are going to be developing our legislative agenda in a workshop on Wednesday of our next meeting. And my guess is that we're going to be maybe stronger than some of the suggestions. Whenever you have those opening things, whenever you have those media events, my guess is, I can't speak for the board yet, but my guess is that we would like to be part of that tent.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other?
As you can see, this gets quite complicated, we had a wonderful discussion outside here, and a lot of the discussion was about the flavor bans and just things as we've presented each month. It becomes obvious that things are popping on this all the time. There are things that are always coming up. But Janet, to your point, yes, we are keeping the youth front and center in what we're trying to do. And the flavoring is certainly a marketing tactic by the industry. So the next piece that want to address, I'm going to ask Sarah to come back up and talk about some American Lung Association resources, including the Intervention for Nicotine Dependence, Education, Prevention, Tobacco, and Health, otherwise known as In-Depth. So turn it back to you.
Hi. So today, now I'm wearing my American Lung Association hat. So I'm very pleased that the Lung Association last September, just a few weeks ago in September, introduced In-Depth, which stands for Intervention for Nicotine Dependence, Education, Prevention, Tobacco, and Health. This is an alternative to suspension program. It is not specifically cessation. It is I'll give me the overview. I kind of jumped ahead. Let that sink in for a moment. So what it is a convenient, easy to implement, customizable, structured program that addresses what's going on right now, and most importantly, it is free to schools. So I have an example of the implementer's guide that I can share with you. Basically, you go through these 4 modules. It's meant to be in school, and it's meant to be facilitated with an adult, and that adult can be a teacher, administrator, a coach, a parent volunteer. They just have to go through the facilitator training, which is online. It's like less than 2 hours, again, free. And once you're a facilitator, then you have access to all the materials, including this guide. So it's broken into 4, I might be jumping ahead, 4 50-minute units: getting the facts, addiction, alternatives to product use, past, present, future. So it was specifically designed, and it's been tested. It was piloted in 11 schools for youth and the community settings. So it could be used in schools, but it could also be used, churches could use it. Really, any youth group, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, anybody could really use this. But we feel like the schools were our main target because we know schools are reaching out to find ways to address this. So it's specific to vaping or other tobacco products, but it does very strongly address vaping. So say you have a student who has been caught vaping once. Don't suspend them, or however many times. They could do this in school unit, and a lot of the strength of it is in the one-to-one interaction with the facilitator who's an adult. So to become a facilitator, very simple, ung.org/in-depth. There's a brief survey, and then kind of ask things like, what is your connection to youth? Are you a teacher? Are you a youth group leader? Are you a coach? Then there's the training, which I said is less than 2 hours, and then you get all the materials. So what you find there is policy guidance, which is a lot of what we've been talking about for the policies about vape in schools. Then a key component is something called the Vape Talk, and that is a parent's guide, or really it can be any adult, grandparents, any kind of significant adult in a child's life. And it's a conversation guide. How can you talk about vape with them? That is available on our website, also free. In the next few weeks, the Lung Association is going to be promoting the Vape Talk through various communications channels, helping parents and adults in children's lives address this problem. Nobody is quite sure how to go at it, and so the Vape Talk is a tested, piloted way to do that. We have various information about e-cigarettes. We have one-pagers on from a student point of view, from an administrator point of view, from a parent point of view, so we've got a bunch of materials to help. And then the other thing to mention on here is our Not on Tobacco program, which is our youth cessation program. That has been very successful, but we are currently revamping it to include more vape. We're learning more and more that stopping cigarettes is different than stopping vaping. So I would say in a few months, look for more information on our updated Not on Tobacco program. But how we can make this available is first of all, just to let the schools know. I know I had a call from the principal at Goddard School, and he was asking what did we have, and so I sent him all these materials. But I know working with Jordan Roberts, making sure that schools know that this program is available to them, and it's turnkey, it's free, it's something they can do right away. We'll be doing more of these community education presentations, local events. We're available to speak at PTA meetings or other Big Brother, Big Sister, whatever. We are available to talk about this program and help everyone understand how to use it. We're talking about it on social media. We'll talk about it to any, like when I spoke to the principal, I am happy to speak to any school administrator, principal, whatever, to help them with this and to work with all of our community partners to make sure that they have this program. It's a pretty in-depth, and I'm happy to pass this around. Actually, maybe we could do that. It's got a lot of activities and conversation guides and everything you would need to sit down with a youth and to go through this program. Just an example of some of our resources there that you can use to promote to your communities, to parents, that those are all available on the website. And then if you want to look into it more, there's have any questions, there's the email, there's an 800 number, but more importantly, it's a way for us to all work together. Obviously, we want to reduce tobacco and nicotine use among youth.
Well, thank you. This is really good. I just leaned over to Randy. I said, we need to get this to the superintendent, so I think he's probably going to be getting with you, counsel the superintendent.
Yeah, probably November.
So we'll get that out to super. This looks like a really good way to help support youth and folks that are helping that way. So thank you to you and your organization for that. That looks really good, and I know Michelle's been involved in the task force a lot, and I have a feeling she's probably looking at this right now. So.
And I just wanted to share one thing. I've been promoting this. I've given a few presentations. I went to Hayes last week and presented to a few school districts, and they're very excited about this. And I actually have an intern who's going to be working with Shawnee schools, kind of piloting this program within the school. So we're hoping to kind of do a qualitative discussion after. So I'd be happy to share his the data he collects after he gets done with this project to kind of reflect on what they thought of the program. We're very excited about it.
And at this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Pham from Children's Mercy. She's a pediatrician, and we've consistently had questions about cessation, how the task force was going to address that. It is extremely complicated, very challenging, but we feel like we're in capable hands, so I'll turn it over to her for her to enlighten us.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tweelin Pham, and I'm an urgent care pediatrician at Children's Mercy, and I'm really here today with my American Academy of Pediatric hat and policy. I'm the legislative chair for the Missouri chapter, but I'm very glad that you guys have welcomed me over here in Kansas. Just putting on my policy hat for 2 seconds, right now the American Academy of Pediatrics is testifying on the Hill about a act called the Reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic Act that would prohibit all flavors, including menthol. It would raise tobacco age to 21. It would prohibit online sales of tobacco, which is what we're finding is a big loophole. And it would also hold e-cigarettes the same marketing problem. So it would address everything, so I would definitely encourage everyone to talk to their representative because they're looking for sponsors for that bill still. So I would say that I really have enjoyed the work that this vaping task force has done because my philosophy is for an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of treatment. And honestly, I wouldn't be here talking about tobacco cessation if we had been, as a community, better at addressing this when this first came into place about a decade ago. What I'm seeing personally in my urgent cares, our kids are coming in fairly addicted. They're using up to a pod to 2 pods a day. They're waking up at night because they need the nicotine at night because they can't go that long. So pediatricians are experiencing this level of addiction that we've never had to deal with kids. If you think of the traditional kids back in high school who smoked traditional combustible cigarettes, they smoked 1 or 2 cigarettes a week. A pack might last them a month. We are now seeing kids who are getting a pack to 2 packs a day, essentially, of nicotine. And really, there's no scientific evidence for that because what we're relying on is for Juul or the nicotine companies to say, oh yeah, this is what we designed, 1 pod equals 1 pack. We still have really no way to quantify that at this point. Tobacco cessation is difficult because there isn't a lot of data out there in scientific research on vaping specifically. We do have a lot of knowledge on combustibles that we're trying to translate into more vaping, but we're still unsure if this is going to work. Dr. Edelman, who is the head of Children's Mercy Adolescent Medicine, actually piloted a similar program to In-Depth a number of years ago in the Baltimore School District, in which he had smokers in high school who expressed interest in quitting. He put them in 2 randomized controlled groups. One group, he said, here is a pamphlet that says why smoking is bad, don't do it, and he followed up with them. And the other group went through an intensive 8-week motivational interviewing course, and he was actually able to show that the people who went through the course were more likely to quit, stay quit, and had lower levels of bioavailable nicotine in their blood. So when we talk about cessation, I am really a component of these community-based programs because 1, there are not a lot of doctors in the communities who are comfortable with doing biopharmaceutical changes to cessation. And 2, the ones that are comfortable aren't accessible to everybody else. So we need to do something that's more community-based, and that's why I really do enjoy the In-Depth program. Now, when it gets to nicotine replacement therapy, because the history of cigarette smoking was you were getting more nicotine in the replacement therapy than you were in the cigarettes that they were using because they were smoking maybe 1 or 2 cigarettes a week. And so now that's switched. And we're getting to a point where they're inhaling much more nicotine in the e-cigarettes than are in the nicotine replacement therapy. The issue is, however, there are no FDA guidelines for people under 18 with nicotine replacement therapy. So it's never been studied in kids and pregnant women. There aren't any guidelines. Everything is just extrapolated from adults at this point, so we don't have great guidance either on nicotine replacement therapy for kids. Now, I know that someone had mentioned adults smoke candy. So what pushback we're actually getting is from the EU. The UK had published a paper saying that e-cigarettes actually helped smoking cessation. But if you look at their paper and you look at their model, you can't really say that data is comparable to what we're seeing in the United States. One, the EU has heavily regulated the vaping industry. Two, they will not allow as much nicotine in their pods as we're allowing here in the United States. Their maximum level is 1.8%. We're at 3 to 6%. So we are almost 2 to 3 times higher than the EU. And three, they have universal health care, so they have access to doctors and other things to help them quit. Also, what the paper shows is that they're not really quitting, they're just changing one addiction to the other. So 80% of the adults who quit in that EU paper were still smoking e-cigarettes a year later, versus only 9% of those who tried other types of nicotine replacement therapies. So it's not apples to oranges here. Do you guys have any questions for me at this time?
Board members, any questions? The information was very helpful. We appreciate coming, and I think you can see how passionate we are about all of this.
And I
how it
appreciate that.
affects our children.
Yeah, and I think my issue, what I am hearing from kids, is it's safe. It's just water vapor. And I think that we have been behind the ball about saying the hazards of it, and now that we've gotten to this critical mass point, we have so many kids who are addicted that it's not a matter of suspension where you got caught smoking, you probably have gotten a detention or suspended and maybe didn't do it, but it's a level of addiction that one day of suspension is not going to make you stop. You're going to just go stay home and vape more. And the nicotine devices are the companies have been very smart about this. It delivers way more nicotine in one puff than a combustible cigarette does. And it's so easily concealed, and they've changed the model so many times that it doesn't burn, there's no real after effect, there's not a lot of smoke or smell with it. And so kids are able to hide it. And I'm sure that you all saw the article the other day where we were finding kids just drinking it in schools out of their pens. And so there's just levels of toxicology that we can't even begin to address here with kids, or putting other things in it, of course. Marijuana, essential oils. I have seen kids mix their own at home because they think it's safe to ingest, therefore it's safe to inhale, and that's not correct.
Well, you've generated a few questions. Dina Horst.
Thank you. We have also heard that students are mixing other drugs into this product. So could you maybe address what you're seeing in that arena as well, and how that's affecting maybe even the addiction component, even from a different point of view?
So nicotine in general releases your reward center in use. So when an undeveloped brain, the brain doesn't fully develop until 25, is exposed to high level of nicotine, it actually releases your reward center. So you're always looking for that reward, that feedback, that high. And that's why when we say that kids who start, or people who start smoking before 21 are more likely to be addicted longer in life, that's the reason, is it's already affecting their brain at a molecular level. And so it just opens the door to look for a similar high. The most common, and if you look at the vaping injuries that we're seeing across the country, THC is probably the biggest component. And a lot of those are black market vapes, so they could be anything in it. I think we were finding out that it was some components of vitamin E oil was causing what was called lipoid pneumonia, so it's almost a chemical reaction and inflammation in the lungs is what we were seeing. But 25% of the vape lung injuries are still nicotine only. So we don't really know yet exactly what part of the component is causing all these inflammatory reactions in the lung. And my worry as a pediatrician is that it mimics flu symptoms, and we're about to go into flu symptoms or flu season. So you can have fever, you can have GI complaints, you can have, and then it progresses to the respiratory complaint. That's every child with the flu that I see. And so now I'm really having to think, gosh, could this be a vaping injury in a kid and I have to watch them closely, or is this just the flu? And there's just no guidelines right now for physicians to really tease that out. And actually, if you look at the CDC requirement for identifying a vape injury, they're really saying that I have to rule out every infectious disease, lung biopsies, PFTs, long-term. So we're putting a lot into healthcare as well, trying to address these kids who are sick in the hospital.
What I was referencing was more illegal drugs,
Yes.
such as marijuana, and even I've heard of cocaine being mixed with it, and that's kind of what I was referencing. So
I'm seeing THC personally in my clinic of kids admitting to that is probably the most popular. I've not seen the other illicit harder drugs, but the problem with the THC is you don't know what's in those pods. They've put whatever they've wanted into it.
Steve
So
Roberts?
the addiction could be beyond the nicotine as well.
It could be.
Thank you.
Steve Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you discuss the pluses and minuses of us taking a hard line? Let's say, we're gonna ban it, that's it. You know, it's not permitted, no discussion. Certainly there are pluses and minuses, and I would, is Dr. Pham?
Yes.
I would really respect and appreciate your perspective on this. What are the pluses and minuses of us taking a hard line on this?
So, taking a hard line on a full-on vaping ban, I see a lot more pluses than minuses, but as a pediatrician, I don't see as much as the adult world. And of course, it is what we're seeing with kids who vape are more likely to transition to combustible cigarettes. So, and we know exactly what the long-term effects are for that. What I'm seeing now from vaping kids is even the ones that have only been vaping for a short period of time, they're already having symptoms, which makes me really worried of what long-term damage that we just don't know because we haven't studied it. So that is also a plus of preventing that. Minuses, I don't think that you can 100% discount what the EU and the UK has said for smoking cessation, but I think there's got to be a lot more controlled research before we can come out and say, oh, this is a good smoking cessation tool. I think that is much for an adult. I don't think that there's any benefit for that in children. And I think that we need to regulate what and how much, and under a physician's supervision, of how do you taper this down. But even then, I would say that is a gray area because we don't know the long-term effects of that. I know that's what the EU is saying and the UK is saying, but right now in the United States with all the other injuries, I don't think that we are safe to say that.
Thank you,
Janet Wall?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Many years ago, the Surgeon General came out saying that cigarette smoking was hazardous to your health. Why has that not happened on this?
I think that we are going that way, and it's just going to take a little bit more time. I'm not sure why it has not happened on a federal level, but the Surgeon General has come out and said that youth vaping is an epidemic that needs to be addressed right now. And the CDC has come out with a lot more resources, I would say, in the last year for physicians who are seeing this. I think the problem was we had to see negatives, unfortunately, before we could address it.
Well, it just appears to me, I've heard of so many people dying. I've heard of people having popcorn lung. I mean, so many things that this seems kind of pressing and pretty big, I would think that
and that's why
something should be said.
I think that's why they've definitely started talking about, the Surgeon General has come up and said that vaping is an epidemic that we need to address. And that was my concern, is that we didn't know smoking was bad for us for decades. And we are figuring out that vaping is bad within a couple of years. And so going back to your question about the cons of or the pros and cons of a ban, like I personally don't see, and this is my personal opinion, is I don't see a con with the ban, but I think that there is more research, and I think that our European countries would very much disagree with me because they think that the United States will do a disservice to their smoking citizens on cessation if we do a flavors ban. And that has been official in the New England Journal of Medicine that they wrote when we have been talking about a vaping flavor ban, because they said that that was a primary way to get adults to switch from smoking to e-cigarettes.
Michelle Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I think our biggest enemy right now is the public. After being on the anti-vaping task force, reading comments on Facebook, you're trying to control us. The government's trying to get in our lives and control everything. The biggest thing is just you could sit out there all day and just try to, go back and forth with these people. It's like it's crazy. It's like the public isn't educated on this right now, and they're right now our biggest enemy. I feel it's nonstop. It's so fluid what we're getting in those emails every day on new information, and then the testimony last week that I heard at a middle school by a former coworker of mine, a KSDE student, just how quickly he was addicted, and then how the withdrawals for over a month that he had to go through just to get off of that. And he's still struggling with pulmonary issues. Trying to climb 3 flights of stairs is a struggle for him, and those are the kind of things that we need to get out to I think we're getting to the students for sure. It's just getting to the public.
Public education, and I've been in those chat rooms and I've seen, and it's hard. But also I'm a pediatrician and I have to deal with anti-vaccine people as well, so it's not quite as a stretch for me as well. I'm kind of used to being called in Big Pharma's pocket. And so I don't think it's a stretch. I think the majority of the public is aware. I think that it's a small vocal minority, but I do think that we need to reach youth more, because when you're young, you're invincible. It's not going to happen to me until it does. And I think vaping needs to be where cigarettes are. I wasn't going to smoke because I've been told since I was little that it's bad for you. We need to get the younger generation to equate vaping and cigarettes as the same.
Janet?
You said that the flavors impacted adults who were trying to quit smoking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, haven't the flavors just been out in just a few years? Because I had a dear friend who bought one of these vapes many years ago, and it's well over 10, and there was no such thing as flavors back then.
I'm not
Or
sure.
at least that I was aware of.
I'm pretty sure at least since 2010, the flavors had been out in the vape shops. Because I remember even the earliest articles I was reading from physicians who were taking a journey in the vape shops to talk about vaping cessation, or not vaping cessation, just what it was, because vape shops were just jumping up everywhere and no one really knew what it was. And so I actually read an article off of a pediatrician blog that I follow in Kansas City, and it was 2010, where she talked about going to this vape shop, talking to the owner, smelling the watermelon fragrance in the air as he vaped. And so it's been pretty early that we've had the flavors.
Well, it's just been the last, 4 or 5 years, though, that our kids have picked up on it, and that's when they became targeted. Is that correct?
I'm not really sure when, because we would have to go back. I would have to go back and look at data. I know it's just been increasing in the last few years of how many kids are addicted. Like every year, the number is growing now. But the problem is targeting isn't just what we're seeing on TV or in billboards. It's social media. And that is a whole different animal to target. And when we have influencers and these vape parties, and you see it on your Instagram, that you can't control this. I mean, the federal government can't control what someone puts on their personal Instagram. And if you have 4 or 5 million followers and they're youth, then it's hard to control that person because they're technically not getting paid to advertise. And so I can't tell you exactly when, but I can follow up on the timeline unless Jordan has information or someone of my group.
I would say 2015, when Juul hit the market. That was the watershed moment that.
Okay, well, then that's what I thought. Cause
Yeah.
it was like, cause it's like been the last 4 or 5 years that I've
Yeah.
had superintendents tell me about. it,
We,
you know.
we have, I think last count was 15,000 flavors now. I mean, before it was, a few hundred.
Okay, well, I had not heard of the flavors till the Juul, I guess.
Yeah, but the vape shops were mixing their own before that.
Yeah.
Vape has been the most commonly used tobacco product by young people since 2013, so.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and just to finalize on the flavorings, yeah, I think prior to Juul hitting the market, the vaping industry wasn't as targeted on youth as it was, as it is now. I'm not going to say they were responsible before 2015 and have been irresponsible since, but the development of Juul, and Juul didn't explode until 2018 when they really kind of got their advertising machine rolling. And one of the discussions we had outside had to do with the speed with which individuals develop an addiction to nicotine. And again, going to Dina, to your comment about addicted to other chemicals, we need to keep in mind that nicotine is as addictive as almost any substance. It's more addictive than cocaine or heroin. It is, just because it's packaged as something that we've seen for decades doesn't mean that it's not addictive. It is an extremely addictive substance.
If I may. Yeah. My reason for commenting was more that I'm a part of a committee or an advisory committee on opioids and prescription drugs, but they're just to make sure that they are aware. I just wanted to verify that kids are using it to access those drugs as well. So it's not just an addiction necessarily to nicotine, but it's other things as well, which are things that we address through specific programs. We don't seem to do that with nicotine necessarily, but it probably should be.
Okay, we'll be wrapping up. Have a 1-minute video that a colleague sent me that I think I wanted to share with you.
Vaping devices like e-cigarettes or pods heat a liquid that usually contains nicotine and other chemicals to create an aerosol, also known as vapor, which is then inhaled into the lungs. Because vaping is relatively new, long-term research on how it impacts people's health is still ongoing. We do know that people who vape are choosing to inhale some pretty toxic chemicals in a way that hasn't been fully studied. Even though vaping products are marketed as a way to help quit smoking, data on their effectiveness is mixed. Because many contain high levels of nicotine, people are at risk of becoming more addicted. In fact, one study found that 63% of people who Juul didn't realize they were using nicotine at all. The bottom line, vaping may be promoted as being safer than smoking, but that doesn't mean it's safe.
So that's an example of a video that we will likely be sending out to schools so that they can share with their parents. No presentation would be complete without having Jordan Roberts. So I'm going to, she's going to talk about the Vaping 101 document you have.
Yeah, so this is something that we wanted to address in our cessation subgroup. So before the in-depth program came out, because that just came out in the past month, we were like, how do we equip school personnel with information about vaping? And so specifically we're trying to target school healthcare providers, which would be school nurses, athletic trainers, counselors, anything of the like. So we wanted to create a document to go out to them specifically. So this is what we've created. So the cessation subgroup came up with different topics to put on there, what would be most relevant to them. And our team at KDHE put together these really cool graphics, which I'm super excited about. I think it looks really good. So yeah, we wanted to get this out specifically to the school healthcare providers, and then we're hoping to create a sheet for every provider. So like one for athletic trainers, one for school nurses, one for school counselors, because we think if there's going to be something aimed directly at them, the likelihood of them looking at it and using it will be more likely. So we created this, and we're open to any feedback that anybody has. Were we gonna ask for approval or? No. Okay, here it is.
We still have to address some.
Oh yes, so KSDE is gonna look through a few, like check all the links and make sure that everything is accurate. But once that happens, we'll try to get those out through all of our different listservs and things like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. This is great information.
Great.
So I just wanted to wrap up with a few things. One of them is that the Shawnee Mission School District adopted a resolution for litigation, similar to what we talked about that Goodland had done. I'm sorry, Goddard, not Goodland. Has just some stats. As of October 8th, CDC reported 26 vaping-related deaths in 21 states. There are about 1,300 vaping lung injury cases. And as Dr. Pham had noted, many of the deaths and illnesses have been linked to THC. But this is a statement from the CDC. Exclusive use of nicotine-containing products has been reported by some patients with lung injury cases, and many patients with lung injury report combined use of THC and nicotine-containing products. Therefore, the possibility that nicotine-containing products play a role in this outbreak cannot be excluded. So, as Dr. Pham noted, the pro-vaping group is extremely vocal, and they are latching onto anything to be able to put electronic nicotine devices in the clear. The CDC indicates that is not the case, and Dr. Pham used the term vocal minority. I think there are times that we tend to discount the vocal minority, but the emphasis on that should not be on the minority, it's on the vocal, because they are extremely vocal. As Michelle mentioned, the social media, the chat room, the comments, they are out in force, and this is not going to be easy. So we appreciate the time that you've given us. If there are any remaining questions, I'm sure I or any of my esteemed colleagues would be happy to answer.
Steve Roberts has.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, I don't know if this is for you or Jordan or Dr. Pham, but on the Vaping 101, is vaping safe? This is no. Okay. By what authority can we go forward and say, we know it's not safe? I mean, we sense it's not safe. We know there's more studies to be done, all that stuff. We have all this language back and forth. We want to be moderate in our judgments. But it says not safe. So by whose authority can we base that on?
Yeah, so that's based off the CDC. So they, and notice how, no, e-cigarettes are not safe for kids, teens, and young adults. And it would also be like pregnant women. So they haven't came out. So if you were talking about for adults, they wouldn't say that it's not safe. But when we're talking about this group of people, it is not safe, and that is definitive.
So it's the Centers for Disease Control that definitively have said this?
Yes.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I want to extend my thanks to the Vaping Task Force again. You know, we put you guys up with the charge, and I tell you, you've taken it, and we really appreciate it. I'd be very interested to see how the Smoking 21 goes forward. I am quite certain that Mr. Porter and Ms. Horst will, as our legislative liaisons, will be very supportive in anything that they can do to help with that over across the street, as well as any of the rest of us. And the support from the American Lung Association with this in-depth looks very good and very positive, and hopefully will be very helpful in the Vaping 101 materials. You guys have done a great job. I still think we have an uphill battle, but I see that we're all working together, and you know, we are, as you guys see, we're adamant about this, and we really appreciate your work and your conscientious focus on this as we try to help our young folks. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Board members, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Till we go to our reports, is recognition of the Anti-Bullying Awareness Week in Kansas, which is October. So Kent Reed is here to share this information with us. So welcome, Kent. We're glad to have you, and look forward to your information.
Good morning, Board, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. October is National Bullying Prevention Month nationally, and just as a reminder, in 2011, the State Board, along with the State Senate, approved a motion, a joint resolution, that named the first full week in October as Anti-Bullying Awareness Week, and we had that last week. And not only do I want to bring awareness to that week, but notice that the theme was Choose Peace, and we decided that we wanted to align the work of the Anti-Bullying Awareness Week with our Safe Schools unit, and they have presented to you. That's how we came up with the theme. But really what we would like to do is kind of refresh your memory, kind of provide a mindset as we move toward December and our bullying task force recommendations. So again, I've tried to hand out a folder that includes not only the PowerPoint, but also a couple of documents that it will be easier for you to read off the folder than, say, off the screen. Just as a reminder, again, here are the objectives and the goals of the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Bullying. To research and identify current bullying definition, trends, incidents, and prevention measures across the state. Coordinate with stakeholders to address relevant issues effectively. To best meet the needs of our students, and to review work in the areas of social emotional learning as set forth by the State Board goals. Review current statutes, regulations, and policy to determine need for change, and present recommendations to KSDE to address bullying, cyberbullying prevention, and training measures. Here's a list of the meetings that we've had so far, and we so appreciate those of you who have been able to attend. I think Jean has attended every one, and the commissioner has attended most of them. It's very important that not only you hear what we hear as far as the testimony, but that you provide your input at those meetings as well. I would offer an invitation. October 30th, which is the third day of the annual conference, we are having a work group session in Wichita, and the address of that is the Instructional Support Center there on Main Street, 412 South Main, and it'll be just for the task force members, and we will be reviewing committee reports. So we certainly would offer an invitation that you might be able to join us, since many of you will be in Wichita for the annual conference as it is. Also, I'd like to express appreciation to our chairs, Dr. Rick Ginsberg and James Regier, and staff that is working on this project would include myself, Myron, who's here in the background, and Pat Bone and Amy Martin. And we appreciate all the efforts that they've put into this effort. The work groups are data and research, evidence-based practices, barriers and solutions, cultural awareness, policy practice accountability, and then the writing group. And the chairs are chairing that particular group. One of the very first things we found was that there is a varying degree of understanding about the definition in the state of Kansas relative to bullying. For years, those of us who have been in education really had the Alveus definition drilled into us, and that was if it's pervasive, severe, and repeated. All of that changed with the court case, Theno versus the board, several years ago. And based on the court case, the legislature amended the bullying statute to read as you see it in your handout and also on the screen. And the key is, number one, also a couple of years ago, the legislature changed the definition to include all people at school, whether it be staff, parents, or students. Previously, it was just a student-based statute. Now, as Mr. Dennis so eloquently states it, no one can bully anyone at school. Then you notice that after that first boldface section, it says that is sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive. The original statute said and that was the Alveus definition. And now the definition based on Theno versus the board and the new statute is that or pervasive is the key. The examples of this would be hazing, initiation rights. It might only happen one time. But if it's sufficiently severe or pervasive, then it's bullying according to the definition in the state of Kansas. Okay? What we're trying to do also is get schools to understand that the requirements for them relative to bullying prevention is that they need to have a plan, adopt and implement a plan, that they need to have a policy, and that they need to have training. And you can see the boldface terms there. Okay? Now, the local board can add anything they like to that. This is probably the most requested document that I received relative to bullying prevention. And what it is, it's a flow chart based on Theno versus the board, the court case. And the court asked several questions. Okay? So if you want to pull that out of your packet, I'll kind of walk you through it very quickly. I'll get my own copy out here. But it first asks, was it an intentional act? Okay. Then the question is, was it severe, persistent, or pervasive? Yes, then you follow the flow chart down. No, then it's not bullying. Okay, then does it create an intimidating, threatening, or abusive educational environment? If so, then we go down to a couple of other questions, and that is, did it do personal harm or was there property damage? We found that this chart is very, very helpful in getting administrators, counselors, teachers, parents to better understand what the definition of bullying is in the state of Kansas. Are there any questions about that? Okay. You'll also remember that a year ago this summer, the board revised the social emotional character development standards to include bullying prevention, child sexual abuse, and youth suicide. And there are specific examples on our webpage, curricular examples that schools can follow in terms of how to implement that policy and that plan to address bullying prevention. And there will be more coming. We're kind of in a holding pattern relative to the webpage because of some issues with bringing the webpage, the KSDE webpage up to standards, but also we're waiting until the task force finishes its work and the recommendations come out before we move any further relative to adding things to the webpage. Okay? But I just wanted you to know, or to remind you, that when we did revise the SECD standards, bullying prevention was included in that. The other thing is, at our last task force meeting, Lisa Cheney from Greenbush presented on the Communities That Care survey. And here are just a couple of highlights of the presentation that she gave. But if you would look at the chart that I gave you in your folder, essentially what Lisa did is that she took the 6 questions that are on the CTC and then gave you a statewide synopsis of the results of those, okay? And I think that's important to have to understand relative to what kids are thinking statewide relative to bullying. The other thing that I think is important is that there's a correlation between bullying and youth suicide, thus the term bullycide. This chart, and it's probably best seen in that handout because it's a little bit blurred on the screen, it's part of the depression scale that the Communities That Care survey has added as part of their bouquet of offerings with the survey. And the results were 9,707 students had thoughts about suicide. That's relatively 18.7%. 5,573 made a plan relative to suicide. That's 10.7%. And then 2,200 made an attempt. That's about 4.3%. And that's generally with a plan. And then those that just arbitrarily made an attempt without a plan, that was 313. So you can see there's a correlation between bullying and youth suicide, and that we're addressing that through the task force. And also the mental health advisory. Any questions about that? Now, to get back to the awareness week, normally I show a lot of submissions. I'm going to just show one submission, and it's one that I've shown you before, and it's from USD 345 at Seaman, and they teach their kids, tweet others the way that you would want to be tweeted. That's cute, but to a more specific point is that Seaman is currently going through a review of their bullying prevention policies and their protocols. And I had the opportunity to attend a work session where they used tools that MTSS has taught them, applied those analysis tools to the Communities That Care survey to come up with some policy decision making. And I would hope that all schools across the state would begin to think about reviewing their policies and their plans for implementation and their training plans as well. With that, here's the links for the task force, and we have all of our documents and all of our data that we've collected, and of course our bullying prevention website. I'll stand for questions, Madam Chair.
Steve Roberts?
Yes, thank you. I'm looking at the concentric circles.
Uh-huh.
And I'm reading this as 18.7% of all Kansan students.
All those that were surveyed.
Surveyed, okay. Where's this data come from?
This is from the Communities That Care survey.
Okay, but what does that mean? I mean, who was surveyed? I want to know what this data means.
Well,
truly, what does this data mean? What does this mean? Because this is horrifying to me.
yes, well, it's disturbing, no doubt. The CTC is administered, okay, I'll go back to this slide. 81% of our districts utilize the Communities That Care survey. The total number of students surveyed was 71,757.
So that's roughly 1/7 of our population, give or take.
Your math skills are much better than mine.
A little bit different, Steve. It doesn't start till 6th grade, so you don't survey any student below 6th grade.
Right. The grade levels.
6, 8, 10, and 12.
Right.
Right.
So it's close to a third.
6, 8, 10, and 12.
The grade levels that are
We run
surveyed
about 35,000 kids a grade.
are 6,
Okay.
8, 10, and 12.
So the survey surveyed roughly a third of those who were eligible to participate. Is that right?
You know, I would.
Between a third and a half.
Yeah, I would defer to Lisa and Greenbush because they crunch all of the numbers. And in fact, I would recommend that at some point they come and present to you about the community care.
So the 9707 has a denominator of 71,000. It's 9707 out of 71 and some change.
I would think.
It just keeps getting better. We have to change this thing. I mean, we have to change the way we do school. We have to get more joy and thoughtfulness. I don't know, there's no magic bullet, but whatever we're doing, it's got to change. This has to change.
Steve, the schools receive their communities of care's results.
I'm sorry?
The schools receive their own communities of care results.
At the building level
At the
and
building
the district
level,
level,
district level.
and the county level. However, the building level and the district level are not published publicly. The
Correct.
county level numbers are.
Right, and districts should be responding to this in terms of social, emotional, health, and it is truly a crisis, and I'm not minimizing the numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to get a picture that this isn't just putting out numbers and nothing happens.
Well, I'm just
You know.
thinking
Now-
out loud, as a local control state, there has to be some top down here. I mean, we can't just trust people to just do the right thing because we're a local control state. I don't know what our responsibility is, but we have a responsibility to address this. I don't know what it is.
Well, I would go one step further in what you're saying. These numbers of participants have increased over the last several years. Because there's an opt-in issue for a lot of districts. A lot of districts opted out of communities of care, but now have chosen to come back into the communities of care
Right.
survey.
Mine
This
is-
is not all the students that could be surveyed. It's a representative sample, no doubt.
Okay.
But it's not all students, not all districts.
That's correct. When the Student Privacy Act was passed, the participation rate went down almost below 50%. Now it's back up to about 81% of the districts are participating in the community care survey. It's the largest cohort we have. If someone has a better cohort, please bring it forward to the task force and also to the Mental Health Advisory Board so that we can use that data to drive decision making. But right now, this is the best tool that we have.
And we are using, I don't want to interrupt, but to address Steve, we're not doing it as well as we will a year or two from now, or even well into the future. There are way more programs responding to the data in the communities of care, especially when it comes to suicide and to self-harm, than we have in the past. There's not a vacuum out there. In fact, we're filling that vacuum with energy. Do we have a long way to go? Yes. Are we making a difference individually at different places? Yes. Are we helping everyone? No. But we're getting there, okay?
My reaction to that would be, you have worked so hard at making our staffs and our students more socially, emotionally literate, and this is one tool that's helping us do that.
Jim Porter?
I want to define for you, Steve, what we're talking about opt-in and opt-out. Up until a few years ago, parents had to opt out to keep, if this was presented to the school, parents were given the opportunity to opt out. The law changed and now they have to opt in. So you have to have parental permission before a student can even take this exam. Now, what a lot of school districts, including the one I was in, did is on that 100 pages you signed at the beginning, you opt in. But at that time, this is all, in my view, this has always been a very valuable tool because it tells you a whole lot of things. The participation rate went down markedly whenever this is a legislative issue, and perhaps something that should be on our legislative agenda. because at that point, it went down markedly because school districts did not do like what we did, and just send out a thing, do you opt in? And of course, like the notes that go home, they're not read in many cases at the time. So I think that it's important for us to know that this is very valuable information. It tells us some uncomfortable truths, but we need a mechanism where we can get more information from more students, especially if you're a local school. You need to know this information so that you can develop your programs to do that. So that when we're talking about opt-in and opt-out, that's actually a parental thing too.
Madam Chair. Steve, just as one more follow-up, the School Mental Health Advisory Board has been spending hours and days and months looking at youth suicide, and this is like I said, a correlational factor in all of that. But the neatest thing that I've heard in I don't know how long was at the last School Mental Health Advisory, they were given an update on the pilot programs, and they literally told us they were saving the lives of kids and had the data to support it because of their screeners and their assessments, et cetera. We are on the right track, but schools have to be more implicit in their instruction, whether it's youth suicide or bullying prevention or child sexual abuse. They have to be more implicit in their instruction to the kids and to the staff.
And I think when we think about the data from the Kansas Community That Cares, and some folks do other data at their buildings, the children are in our schools, and there's social media now that is a huge impact on kids. There's their home situation that's a huge impact on kids. There's school situations that can be a huge impact on kids. But there are a lot of things that are going on at schools. I think the bullying task force is going to present us with some good recommendations that we'll certainly look at. I believe that's December, if I'm not correct.
Yes. The idea is we have a couple of open forum meetings where people can provide testimony and that testimony is on our website, by the way. We also added an evening session with the help of KNEA on November 19th, and it'll be a Zoom meeting. So if you can't make any of the other meetings, but you can make a Zoom meeting in the evening, you can log on, and we'll get that information to Peggy so that she can share it with you. And then at the December task force meeting, we'll hear what recommendations have been drafted, and then we'll present those at the December board meeting, I believe.
A lot of these things, interventions that are going on, can't mention, and it really was eye-opening, some of the impact that the pilot program of having the school mental health person in the school to help with therapy situations that kids are going through. We see them at school so we can support them. All these issues are not necessarily because of school. Kids have lives, and so the support that we can provide for them is certainly helping.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And I think we have the data to show that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Janet Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, I share your concerns. This is very concerning to me. It was either last year or the year before, I can't recall, that the Johnson County superintendents came out.
Yes.
And formed a task force because they were having such a large number of suicides.
Yep.
Okay. My first question is, do you know whether this has remained the same? Has it declined? Has it grown? I mean, this report over the years.
As far as bullying or as far as youth suicide?
No, actually the suicides, yes.
Well, the data, and I'll defer to Myron, but I believe that we've seen an increase. Now, I haven't seen any 2018-19 data, have you?
It hasn't been a steady increase.
Yeah. The problem we have, and Dr. Watson pointed this out when we had the youth suicide task force through the Attorney General's office, every time a child dies, it goes to the Attorney General's office, and they have a panel that looks at it, but oftentimes it takes 2 years to process those reports, the Child Death Review Board. And one of the concerns we had as an agency, and I believe it's a state board, is we need that data sooner than 2 years later in order to have that drive decisions. But all of our data, Janet, indicates that it continues to be on the rise.
Well, I would like to request a couple of things. Number one, I think it would be a good idea for us to have them come in and explain their data. I mean, you know how, I think that would be a good thing for us to know. and explain.
CTC?
Yes, have them come in, maybe on the next report or something. I'm not in any hurry, but I think it would be a good idea for us to have that. But secondly, I would also like to know, and, you know, I know that we suggested that districts hire more during all the budget cuts. They got rid of counselors, you well know what I'm talking about. And we suggested they hire more counselors, school psychs, and social workers. And I'd kind of like to know,
Okay.
do we have data on that yet?
I would defer to Dr. Watson. I've heard him quote some figures.
Because I'd sure like to see, and if so, is it helping? You know, I mean, are they being utilized, I guess? Thank you.
You bet. Now, just a heads up, the CTC is a very involved survey. In fact, one of the criticisms is that it has too many questions for 6th graders, 8th graders. Dr. Ginsburg would say 142 questions is too many for adults. So it's very involved, and when they come and report, there are several different domains that they can report on. The chart that I gave you is just on the bullying questions. They have drug and alcohol, they have the family domain, et cetera. So we may want to decide what it is that we want to specifically look at, or maybe make it a part of one of your retreats where you have more time, you know, to really digest all of the data.
Thank you, Kent.
Thank you.
Appreciate your information. I know we'll have to follow up and look forward to the report of the task force in December.
And we hope to see you at one of the task force meetings.
Thank you very much.
What time is the one in Whitewater?
Yeah, well, I asked Randy to get that
Okay,
information.
thanks.
Generally, we've been meeting at 10 o'clock, I believe. But I think the Whitewater one is, yeah, the Whitewater meeting is just for the co-chairs and KSDE staff.
Okay.
So the one in Wichita that I mentioned on the 30th would be the handiest for those of you who have
And
mentioned.
they'll get us information on that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, board.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, board members, we're going to go to reports.
Thank you.
And we've got a number of reports, and I'm kind of looking at the time, because I know several of you are driving to Omaha after this, so we do have this. And then we also have an executive session that'll probably take at least 30 minutes. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward. First of all, we do have some NASB delegate information on the candidates. This, in your board report, this is on page 87, excuse me. So,
The attachment below the reports.
Dina, do you have
Well,
any information here
what-
for us?
what I was going to suggest is that you have read through it, and if you have specific ideas of who you would like for us to support, if you would share that with me, we will keep that in mind. But I thought they always come around to talk to the regional meetings. And so in the case of the district, I'm trying to think what they're called. The director, central area director candidates, there's 2 of them. And I thought what we could do is just those of us that are at NASB can sit down, and after we've heard them their spiel. And in addition to this information that is printed, and we can make a determination how I should vote on Saturday, and we'll, if that's okay with all of you, and if you have specific thoughts, let me know before we leave today. And the president-elect is not challenged, so there's Byron Ernest from Indiana.
Okay, board members, are you okay with that as far as the regional?
Yes.
Okay, all right, very good. Okay, thank you, Dina, appreciate it. Okay, we'll do committee reports, and I don't think the policy committee, they didn't meet yesterday, so probably not any update. Legislative liaisons, Jim, Dina. Jim, any update? I know we're gonna have the retreat next month.
Yeah, the retreat next month, and then Dina and I are meeting right after this meeting
with Leah.
With Leah Fleiter at KSB, because the day after our next meeting, we're going to have a meeting of the educational advocates from the lobbyists, and we're going to meet with them to go over the legislative agenda and try to find out ways we can work together. Maybe things that we've missed. We may want to amend our agenda so that we can work together on legislative issues, or things that some people think should be legislative issues that we think should be our issues.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Communications Committee, Jim?
Just a real quick thank you to Peggy and Denise and Ann on their assistance and help to make sure that the Western Kansas trip went well. It was a great trip. All the details were just taken care of perfectly. So thank you very much for your hard work to make that happen. We appreciate it.
I would certainly echo that and thank the board members who were able to come. I know not everybody was, which is fine, but I continue to get feedback from folks when I see folks about how much they appreciated us coming out to Western Kansas. So I think that was very favorably received. Okay, some additional reports in your folders. There are individual board reports that board members have turned in. Governor's Education Council, Jim Porter, any update that you'd like to share with us on that?
Just the subcommittee that I'm on, a competitive edge, had a meeting the other day, and we were looking at high wage, high demand jobs, but that leaves out the fact that there are some critical need jobs, like in healthcare, like in paraprofessionals, like in early childhood, that we need to, and so we're trying to incorporate those critical need areas in our discussion. So that's about where we are now. And unfortunately, I'm going to miss the next meeting of the Governor's Council.
Okay, and as will I, but the group that I'm on is one of the workforce groups, and interesting thing we've been working on is, not only the high wage, high demand and critical need, but, how do we align our K-12 systems with our post-secondary systems to help support the need that's out there. So that's been a conversation, an ongoing conversation there. A number of us attended the Symposium on Early Childhood last week. There was a session on Monday that number of really different departments put on. I think Melissa Rooker and our own Amanda Peterson kind of were very much in charge of that. And over 400 early childhood folks were there, extremely well attended. Amanda and Melissa did report on the results of their needs assessment as they shared with us, and kind of what the next steps are there as they apply for that next level of the federal grant opportunity. So that was a very interesting session and extremely well attended. And then on Tuesday was a session for legislators, and board members were invited. Jim Porter and myself attended that one, and that was a good session also. A lot of legislators very interested in doing what they can do to support early childhood education. We had some speakers, certainly one of them talked about the economic impact that providing early childhood education has on later on, you know, the huge impact that that has. So it was a good session also. I'm sure there are some legislators that will probably be having some discussions about things when the session goes on. School Mental Health Advisory Council is tomorrow, so I will present on that in November, or talk about that in November. And the Teacher Vacancy and Supply Committee meeting, there's a gal from Colorado coming, but I think she'll talk at our retention summit to talk to teacher vacancy and supply, and talk about the workforce issue as it relates to teachers, which evidently some interesting things they're doing in Colorado. So there will be some information there. I don't know if there's any other committees that folks need to report on.
Kansas First Alliance is tomorrow, and I'll miss that.
Okay.
Okay.
Jim?
Kathy, Ann and I both serve on the Accreditation Review Council.
Okay.
And we'd like to recommend for a future agenda item that we have an update on accreditation and what's happened in the last couple of years as we implement it. And we've been doing kind of a few districts each year more, but we're coming to a big threshold.
Yep.
And just an update from the ARC or from the accreditation folks.
I think that'd be very timely.
Yeah.
Probably after December when we get all of our task force reported.
Sure, it's not urgent, but.
But the early part of the year before
Yes.
we get into the next accreditation cycle.
Thank you.
So appreciate that feedback, and we'll look at that as a request for a future agenda item. Okay, board attorney's report, Mark? Mark's gonna pass, okay. Other requests for future agenda items, we had Jim's, yes, Jim, another one?
Here. And this maybe isn't an agenda item, but it could be. Randy, you mentioned in your presentation today that there are other states that are using the ACT, and I for one would like to know which states and what accommodations ACT has made. I know that Colorado has actually worked with ACT in terms of aligning their standards. You know, what other, I guess, word I come up with is accommodations and test administration issues. You know, would be good to know.
I believe they're 19, but we'll get that to you.
Okay, great. That'd be sure. That can be in a weekly report. You know. Other thing, I'd like to bring to the board's attention what we heard and from the regents in our last meeting with the regents, that they have basically, I don't know the right word. I'm just going to say, no longer utilize, or will no longer utilize in 2022, is that right? The Regents curriculum for admission to Regents institutions, you know, which has been the basis of our graduation requirements. I'd like to look at how are we gonna fill that void? What do we need to do? I'm not gonna say get a committee and get a task force and all that maybe, but we need to be looking seriously at how we're gonna fill that void and what message we're going to be sending to our districts. So I'd like to have that as a future agenda item.
That could probably be a whole workshop.
I think people have had careers on this.
Yeah. Dissertations. Mark, or Brad, was that what your dissertation was on?
No.
Okay.
But the seriousness of
No,
it is,
it is
that
very
void
serious,
has
yeah.
there's a void been created by this that it is regrettable, but it gives us an opportunity to look at graduation requirements based on our vision. That's a big blank right between the two. And I don't know what's there. I don't have an agenda. I just know that districts are going to be looking pretty quickly for direction, and if we don't provide it, they will go in many different directions.
Yeah, no, actually, that's a very timely topic. You know, it probably maybe would be more than a session or two.
Might be a retreat, and we need to move, I think, not, immediately like next month, but
Right.
within this winter and spring, we need to be getting our act together as it relates to filling that void.
Okay, very good. Mr. Porter?
This is an issue that has been going on forever, so it's not critical in a hurry. But we are operating a school schedule that was developed in the early 1900s, well over 100 years. That we all know that students, especially students at risk, have 3 months to regress. And I would like to discuss ways, and this is, I say this is well over 100 years old, based on a different economy, based on a different family dynamic. I would like to discuss ways to encourage people to look maybe at alternatives to that, because I don't think that we're meeting the needs of the students in the best interest by just doing something because we've been doing it since 1909.
Novel thought there, Jim. Very good.
It's good enough for me.
Yeah, very good. Okay,
I thought there, but that's okay. For another day.
we'll come back to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it goes with Jim's
Okay, all right.
statement. Next time.
Okay, just a few things under Chairman's report. First of all, I would like to thank everybody, Peggy, Ann, Penny, whoever else, I think Denise, who organized the reception yesterday.
Cheryl Franklin.
Cheryl Franklin, everybody who did that. It was well attended. It went exceptionally well, I thought. I think folks enjoyed being here. Was really able to talk about the last 50 years and what's gone on. So all the board members really appreciate everybody. Commissioner, the Lieutenant Governor, that he came over and was able to share some thoughts with us was, I think, very nice, and it was great. So much appreciation to the members of the department who were able to pull that off yesterday. It was extremely nice, and love to see one of the members on the 1969 board. That was really fun.
Joe was a handful.
I think they all had a lot of good times. So really appreciate that.
And really fun to hear him call Dale a youngster. That was special.
That was good. We
You said Dale
had
still
to
looked the
invite him
same.
over again.
You said Dale looked the same.
Yeah. Just a reminder of some upcoming events. October 28th on Monday is a pre-session for the annual conference, but then the annual conference is on the 29th and 30th in Wichita. I think if you probably need to make sure you've contacted Peggy if you've not already about that. And then November 23rd is the annual Kansas Teacher of the Year banquet, which is always a wonderful event. It'll be in Wichita. I'm trying to think the Marriott. I haven't looked at my
Invitations are in here.
The invitations are in there, but please let Peggy know if you're going to go to that, so we can get that taken care of. In your folders, some of you, I've already seen you opening them up, are little white, mysterious-looking folders.
That was the first thing. Dive in.
Yeah. We let Michelle open it up first to see what it was. But these are your evaluation sheets for the commissioner, the board attorney, and the board secretary. I'd like to have those to me by November 1. You'll also be getting them electronically, so if you don't want to do a hard copy, you'll get them electronically. Also, when it comes right down to it, if you need to call me and give me your numbers over the telephone, we can do that also. The next meeting on November 12th and 13th, the Wednesday, will be the retreat session, and Jim Porter mentioned that. We will be discussing the board's legislative agenda. We are going to be at the Kansas Health Institute, which is kind of right down a block and over a block, so it's very much within walking distance.
So you can use your same parking, I
Yeah.
think, unless.
As long as it's not
It's the
a
second
huge
day?
snowstorm.
Wednesday?
It's the second day.
It's the second
Yeah,
day.
so yeah, you can still park here, and so we will be at that location for our retreat. A couple of appointments. You know, we had our meeting not too terribly long ago with the Kansas Board of Regents and the State Board, and the recommendation was made, and everybody agreed to have a group of Board of Regents members and a group of State Board members to kind of come back together. I don't know what we'll call it, but some kind of a group that's going to meet on a little more regular basis, and then we will then we'll come back again as a bigger group. I think probably we'll invite them to join us sometime, so we'll extend that invitation at some point in time. Who I would like to name to that, whatever we're calling it, Coordinating Council. Okay, that's what we called it the last time, so okay, we're reinstituting the Coordinating Council. Yep. Will be myself and Jean Clifford, so those will be the two State Board members on that. Also, the statewide broadband expansion task force is working, and Jim McNeese has agreed to be on that, so we'll be moving forward on that. Okay, let's take a look at travel. So if you look at your travel information, see what updates and changes. Peggy, do you have my teacher vacancy and supply, November 14th?
Did they move it? Was it October?
Well, there's one in October, and I'm not going to that one, but I'm going to the November 14th.
November 14th.
Yeah.
And I did add your school mental health.
Okay, thank you. Jean's not here. Dina, I don't know how you could do anything else. My gosh, look how busy you are.
I think I wrote it all down.
Very good. Ben, are you all good with what you've got there? Okay, Ann's not here. Jim McNeese?
Good.
All good. Jim Porter, all good?
All good.
Janet Waugh?
I wanted to add that November 6th for the bullying task force in Lawrence.
Okay. Okay, and then Michelle?
November 10th, it's the accreditation for Kansas School for the Deaf. It's on
Okay.
a Sunday evening.
Okay.
We would like as many people that have input for the School for the Deaf to be there for their support.
Okay.
It's a forum, so I would be there for support and just watch, maybe pick some questions.
What day is that?
What day is it? It is Sunday, November 10th, I believe, in the evening at 5 o'clock, I believe it starts. It's at night.
I know Luann's had that in her notes, so
I just got an invitation from.
You might refer back to her notes, because I remember I've seen it. Steve, you have anything to add?
I'll be going to San Diego for the Foundation for Excellence in Education. I think I have a scholarship that'll pay for everything. I might grab one extra night, but I think that'll be on my own, so.
And what are the dates?
Whatever
19th.
dates Porter had.
19th to 21st, I believe, of November.
Yeah, that's right.
The same one.
That's right. But I think they pick up everything. And what they don't, I'll take care of it.
Okay, we have a motion to approve travel. Okay, Jim Porter, a second. Ben Jones. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that looked like an 8-0. Okay, I'm going to turn to Janet Waugh.
I move that the Kansas State Board of Education recess into executive session to discuss the subject of potential litigation, litigation pending, or litigation, legal matters with legal counsel, which is justified pursuant to the exception for matters which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client privilege under KOMA in order to protect the privilege and the board's communications with an attorney on legal matters. This session will begin at, you think we can do it by 12:20?
Yeah.
12:20. And for 30 minutes. No action will be taken during this session. The open meeting will resume in the boardroom at 12:50. And Commissioner Watson, Mark Ferguson, and Brad Neuenswander are invited to join this executive session.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second by Jim Porter. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, 8-0. Thank you. So, except for those people mentioned, if we clear the room and